Welcome to the Snoozy Scientist, where we calmly explore the mysteries of science, one sleepy yawn at a time. Tonight, we're slipping beneath the waves into seas that no longer exist, oceans from hundreds of millions of years ago, vast waters that stretched endlessly into blackness, oceans where the sunlight vanished quickly into eternal night, and where life took on forms so strange, so alien, that they challenge our very definition of what it means to be alive. Think about this: more than 70% of our planet is covered in water, and even today, over 80% of it remains unexplored. If our modern seas still hide so much mystery, just imagine how much stranger the oceans of the past must have been. For over 500 million years, these waters acted as laboratories of evolution, testing, failing, and reinventing life again and again, and the experiments were extraordinary. In those forgotten waters, some creatures grew eyes on stalks, staring in every direction at once. Others carried spines like weapons, their bodies bristling with armor. Some floated with delicate frills and fins, fragile as lace yet strong enough to survive in hostile seas. And some were so baffling that even today, scientists cannot agree on what they truly were. For ages, these oceans kept their secrets buried in stone, hidden in the fossil record. Only fragments remain, impressions pressed into rock, whispers of entire worlds that thrived and vanished long before the first human set eyes upon the sea. Tonight, we'll sink gently into those forgotten depths. We'll drift through the ancient seas layer by layer, where every descent hides something stranger than the last. Creatures that look more like dreams than animals, and some that feel more alien than anything we've ever seen on another planet. But before we begin, if you enjoy slow, soothing explorations like this one, calming journeys through the wonders of science, I'd be grateful if you gave this video a gentle like and perhaps tap subscribe. It helps other curious minds find this peaceful little corner of the internet and lets the algorithm know that sleep and science go perfectly together. And if you'd be so kind, let me know in the comments, where are you winding down from tonight and what time is it there? It's always a joy to see how far across the world this little sleepy corner of science travels. Now take a deep breath, let your shoulders soften, and let's begin our descent into the unknown. The fossil beds of Mazin Creek in Illinois are unlike almost any other place on Earth. Here, in nodules of ironstone split open by patient hands, paleontologists have uncovered creatures that look more like sketches from a dream than the remains of real animals. Among the most famous of these strange discoveries is a fossil that continues to puzzle scientists even after decades of study. It is called Tullimonstrum, though most simply know it as the Tully monster. At first glance, the Tully monster does not seem to belong to any familiar group of animals. It is about as long as a loaf of bread, yet its body plan is so unusual that even the most basic question has no clear answer. Was it a vertebrate, with a backbone like a fish or reptile? Or was it an invertebrate, more like a worm or squid? The debate remains unsolved, making it one of the most enduring mysteries in paleontology. The creature's features seem almost designed to confound. Its eyes do not sit close together on either side of a head, as most animals do. Instead, they are mounted on the ends of a rigid bar that stretches across its body like lanterns on a pole. From the front of its body extends a long, narrow proboscis that ends in a small but sinister circular mouth lined with sharp teeth. It looks less like a face and more like an invention cobbled together from mismatched parts. Some paleontologists have argued that such a design must have a place on the evolutionary tree. At one point, it was suggested that the Tully monster might have been related to jawless fishes, primitive creatures that lived before sharks and bony fishes became dominant. Others believe it was a type of mollusk, closer to squid and snails, than to any fish. Still others suggest that it does not neatly fit into any known group, but was instead a dead-end experiment, a branch of life that left no living descendants. The mystery deepens when you consider how well the fossils are preserved. Mason Creek is famous for capturing not just hard shells and bones, but also the soft tissues of ancient animals. Muscles, organs, and even pigments sometimes appear as delicate imprints in the rock. The Tully monster, therefore, is not just a vague outline, but a clear and repeated image, found in hundreds of specimens. We know what it looked like in detail, yet the puzzle of what it was refuses to be solved. Imagine such a creature moving through the shallow seas of Carboniferous Illinois over 300 million years ago, its long body wriggling, eyes scanning in opposite directions, its proboscis darting forward to seize small prey. Perhaps it glided just above the seafloor, plucking worms or shellfish from the mud. Or perhaps it hunted in open water, snapping at tiny fish and crustaceans. We do not know. Its anatomy suggests possibilities, but none that fit comfortably into the patterns of life we are familiar with today. The very strangeness of the Tully monster reminds us that the history of life is far broader than what we see in the present. Evolution does not work toward a perfect form. It experiments, producing creatures that are sometimes efficient, sometimes extravagant, and sometimes so unusual that their very existence seems improbable. Many of these experiments did not last, but for a time they were as real and successful as any modern animal. Scientists continue to study the Tully monster with new techniques, from scanning its fossils with lasers to analyzing its chemical composition. Each method promises clarity, yet often the results only deepen the riddle. Some analyses suggest it may have had gills like a fish, while others point toward features more common in invertebrates. The conflicting evidence fuels lively debate, and to this day the question remains open. There is something quietly unsettling about a creature that defies classification so completely. It is as though the Tully monster holds a mirror to the limits of human knowledge, reminding us that the fossil record is full of surprises waiting to challenge our assumptions. It speaks of oceans filled with forms of life that would look alien to our eyes, and of a planet where the boundaries of possibility were stretched in every direction. As we leave the Tully monster drifting in its ancient waters, its eyes watching from their outstretched bar, the story flows naturally to other creatures of that same era of experimentation. For just as the Tully monster puzzled the imagination, there were others whose shapes were even more dreamlike, covered in spines and walking on legs that seemed to point the wrong way. These were the inhabitants of the Cambrian seas, and they reveal just how far nature was willing to go in its restless search for survival. The Cambrian period was a turning point in the history of life, a time when the oceans filled with creatures that seemed to come from the imagination of a dreamer. Before this period, life on Earth had been simple, mostly soft-bodied organisms drifting in the water or clinging to the seafloor. Then, in a geological blink of an eye, animals began to take on strange and elaborate shapes, building skeletons, shells, eyes, and limbs in a sudden burst of experimentation. This explosion of diversity gave rise to animals so bizarre that even today, more than 500 million years later, scientists struggle to make sense of them. Among the strangest was a creature so peculiar that when it was first described, it was almost impossible to tell which way was up. This was Hallucigenia. Hallucigenia was first discovered in the famous Burgess Shale of Canada, a fossil bed that preserves delicate details of Cambrian life. The rock layers there are like a time capsule, holding impressions of soft tissues that would normally decay and vanish. When paleontologists uncovered the thin outline of Hallucigenia, they were faced with something that seemed to defy logic. The fossil showed a long, worm-like body, lined with paired spines on one side and stubby appendages on the other, But which side was the back and which side was the belly? Which end was the head and which was the tail? The answers were far from obvious. For decades, the official reconstruction showed Hallucigenia upside down. The spines were interpreted as legs, bristling like stilts, while the true legs beneath were mistaken for tentacles reaching upward. Even the head was misplaced, leaving the creature looking like a surreal puppet from some other world. It was only with later discoveries and closer study that the error was corrected, revealing that the spines were in fact protective armor, while the soft legs carried the animal slowly across the Cambrian seafloor. The head was tiny, with a simple mouth and perhaps a pair of eyes, though even now details remain uncertain. This confusion is part of what makes Hallucigenia so famous. It is not just that the creature looks strange, but that it highlights how far removed Cambrian life was from anything familiar today. The spines may have deterred predators like Anomalocaris, which prowled the seas at the same time, snapping at smaller animals with its grasping appendages. The legs, soft and stubby, suggest a slow-moving lifestyle, perhaps creeping along microbial mats or sediments in search of food. In a world where survival meant constant invention, Hallucigenia's peculiar form was one of countless strategies being tested. The Cambrian period itself was a laboratory of evolution on a grand scale. Within a span of only a few million years, creatures appeared with eyes, jaws, shells, and skeletons for the first time. Some designs would prove enduring, laying the foundations for major groups of animals that still exist today, from arthropods to vertebrates. Others, like Hallucigenia, would leave no descendants, disappearing from the tree of life as suddenly as they appeared. But for the time they existed, they were as real and vibrant as any creature alive now, moving through seas filled with color, movement, and mystery. Hallucigenia is classified as a lobopodian, a group of soft-bodied animals with stubby legs, some of which are thought to be distant relatives of modern velvet worms. This connection suggests that what seems alien at first glance might actually hold deep ties to lineages that quietly persisted through the ages. The thought that a small, spiny worm from more than 500 million years ago could share ancestry with living creatures today bridges the vast gulf of time in a way that is both humbling and astonishing. The fossils of Hallucigenia also remind us how limited our perspective can be. When the first reconstructions were made, they reflected the human tendency to impose familiar patterns onto the unknown, even when those patterns are wrong. It took new evidence, careful analysis, and the humility to admit earlier mistakes to see the creature more clearly. Even now, questions remain. Did Hallucigenia have eyes that could see detail, or only light and shadow? How exactly did it feed? Were the spines purely defensive, or did they also serve another role, perhaps in sensing the environment? These uncertainties are part of the allure, keeping the fossil alive in scientific conversation. As we picture Hallucigenia crawling across the Cambrian seafloor, its spines pointing upward like a tiny forest of spears, we begin to sense the strangeness of that ancient world. The Cambrian was not a quiet dawn of life, but a bustling experimental stage where almost anything seemed possible. It was a time when nature wrote and rewrote the rules, filling the seas with creatures that stretch our understanding of what life can be. From Hallucigenia, our gaze can shift to its neighbors in that same remarkable period. Among them was another creature so odd that when it was unveiled, scientists could not help but laugh at its description. This was Opabinia, an animal with 5 eyes perched on stalks and a long flexible trunk reaching out from its head, a being that seemed even more unlikely than the spiny worm that crawled beside it. Among the strangest creatures to emerge from the Cambrian seas was an animal that seemed to defy all sense of proportion and design. Its fossil, when first revealed to the scientific community, inspired laughter rather than certainty, not because it was trivial, but because it seemed so absurd that no one could imagine how it had lived. This was Opabinia, a small marine predator unlike anything else ever found. Opabinia lived more than 500 million years ago, moving quietly across the seafloor of shallow Cambrian seas. It was not large, perhaps only a few inches in length, but its appearance was so unusual that size hardly mattered. What caught the eye immediately were the five stalked eyes that sprouted from the top of its head. Each was positioned to give the animal a wide view of its surroundings, a panoramic awareness that must have been invaluable in a world filled with predators and prey of unfamiliar shapes. In an ocean where survival often depended on spotting danger or opportunity a fraction of a second earlier, five eyes would have been a remarkable advantage. The head of Opabinia held another surprise. Extending forward was a long, flexible appendage, almost like a hose or trunk, ending in a small claw-like structure. This strange organ allowed the creature to reach out, grasp food, and draw it back to its mouth, which was curiously positioned on the underside of the head and faced backward. Imagine a tiny predator sweeping the seafloor with its trunk, plucking worms and other small animals from the sediment, then curling its appendage back to deliver them to an inverted mouth. It is a feeding strategy seen in no other animal before or since. When paleontologist Harry Whittington presented a reconstruction of Opabinia in the 1970s, the gathered audience of scientists laughed aloud. The five eyes, the backward-facing mouth, the proboscis ending in a claw, it all seemed too outlandish to be real. Yet the fossils were undeniable, preserved with extraordinary detail in the Burgess Shale of Canada. What had once been dismissed as a bizarre mistake of interpretation was in fact a real animal that had lived and thrived in the oceans of the Cambrian. Opabinia's body was soft and segmented, with small flaps along its sides that may have helped it swim in short bursts. A broad tail fan at the rear likely acted as a rudder, giving it some control as it glided near the seafloor. Unlike many of its neighbors that bore heavy spines or thick shells, Opabinia relied more on flexibility and keen senses. With five eyes scanning in different directions, it could detect both predators like Anomalocaris and the smaller creatures that formed its meals. The existence of such an animal shows how the Cambrian period was an age of experimentation. The evolution was testing shapes, behaviors, and body plans on a grand scale, producing creatures that were sometimes efficient, sometimes extravagant, and often unlike anything alive today. While many of these designs would fade away, leaving no descendants, they reveal the creative potential of life when ecological space is open and competition is fierce. Opabinia, with its trunk and cluster of eyes, represents one of those fleeting but remarkable experiments. What makes Opabinia even more fascinating is that it cannot be easily placed within the groups of animals we recognize. It is considered an early relative of arthropods, the lineage that would eventually give rise to trilobites, crustaceans, insects, and spiders. Yet it is not truly an arthropod itself. It sits on the stem of the evolutionary tree, a prototype that never fully carried forward, but whose strange anatomy hints at the steps that led to more familiar forms. In this sense, Opabinia bridges a gap between the alien world of the Cambrian and the ecosystems that would follow. The laughter that greeted its first description has long since been replaced by respect and even admiration. Opabinia reminds scientists that nature is under no obligation to conform to human expectations. What seems absurd to us was once a living, breathing strategy for survival, and in the ancient seas it may have been perfectly suited to its role. Its oddity is not a joke, but a testament to the variety of life that the earth has nurtured. As we picture this small creature, with its 5 glistening eyes and grasping proboscis sweeping across the Cambrian seafloor. We sense again how strange and unpredictable that world was. It was a stage crowded with forms that tested the edges of possibility, some fragile and fleeting, others enduring for millions of years. Among them moved predators far larger than Opabinia, creatures that would shape the balance of the seas and push evolution toward new innovations. One of those was Anomalocaris, a hunter whose size and power made it the terror of the Cambrian oceans. In the Cambrian seas, where life was still experimenting with shape and form, there was one creature that towered above the rest in both size and power. It was Anomalocaris, whose very name means strange shrimp. To the small and fragile animals of its time, it must have seemed unstoppable. Where Hallucigenia crept slowly across the sea floor, and Opabinia scuttled with its 5 watchful eyes, Anomalocaris moved with an elegance and force that made it the terror of the Cambrian world. Anomalocaris could reach lengths of more than 2 feet, which in the Cambrian era was enormous. Most other animals of the time were no bigger than a finger, some no larger than a grain of rice. Into this miniature world came a predator that dwarfed its neighbors, gliding through the water with the grace of a ribbon. Along its body ran flaps that undulated in sequence, giving it speed and maneuverability. A wide tail fan helped steer it as it searched for prey, making Anomalocaris one of the most advanced swimmers of its age. What truly set this animal apart, however, were its eyes. Anomalocaris had giant compound eyes, each made of thousands of tiny lenses. Preserved fossils reveal the incredible detail of these structures, showing that they were far more sophisticated than the eyes of most other Cambrian animals. With such vision, it could detect movement, light, and shadow with precision. Where others might have blundered in the murky waters, Anomalocaris could spot prey from a distance, locking in on it with accuracy. At the front of its body extended a pair of grasping appendages, jointed and spined like barbed tongs. These limbs curled forward, ready to seize. When Anomalocaris closed in on a target, the appendages would snap shut, pinning its victim and drawing it toward the mouth. That mouth was itself a marvel of design, a circular ring lined with hardened plates arranged like teeth. The structure could open and close like a camera shutter, slicing through the exoskeletons of prey. Few defenses could withstand such a weapon. Among the animals most vulnerable to this predator were trilobites, those armored explorers of the ancient seafloor. Though they carried hard shells and could roll into balls to shield themselves, trilobites left behind scars in their fossils that tell a story of relentless pursuit. Many show bite marks that match the shape of the Anomalocaris mouth, evidence of attacks that sometimes ended in escape and sometimes did not. To a trilobite, the shadow of this hunter must have meant the end. The impact of Anomalocaris went beyond individual hunts. Its presence reshaped the ecosystem itself. For the first time, the seas had an apex predator, a creature that sat at the top of the food chain and influenced the behavior and evolution of everything around it. Prey species were forced to adapt, developing better defenses, harder shells, or more agile movements. The rise of predators like Anomalocaris set in motion an evolutionary arms race that would echo through the rest of Earth's history. The balance of life was no longer only about who could gather food from the seafloor, but who could avoid being eaten. The very existence of Anomalocaris seems improbable when placed against the backdrop of its time. It appeared during an age when most life was soft-bodied and simple, yet it possessed vision sharper than almost anything alive then, a body built for speed, and weapons that made it a master hunter. To many scientists, it feels like a creature that should have belonged to a much later era, yet it thrived more than 500 million years ago. As strange as it was, Anomalocaris was not a permanent ruler of the seas. Like many of its Cambrian contemporaries, it eventually vanished, leaving behind only fragments in the fossil record. But for the time it lived, it reigned as a reminder of how quickly life can innovate and how swiftly the rules of survival can change. In those same seas where Anomalocaris hunted, smaller creatures were also adapting, developing new ways of living and seeing. Among them were trilobites themselves, whose diversity and endurance would make them one of the most successful groups in the history of the oceans. From predators to armored wanderers, the Cambrian seas were alive with forms that reveal the restless creativity of evolution. Beneath the Cambrian seas, where predators like Anomalocaris glided in search of prey, another group of animals was quietly spreading across the ocean floor. They were not the fastest or the strongest, yet they became some of the most successful creatures that ever lived. These were the trilobites, armored wanderers whose presence would endure for nearly 300 million years. Trilobites first appeared more than 500 million years ago, and almost immediately they diversified into an astonishing range of forms. Paleontologists have identified more than 20,000 species, and likely many more remain undiscovered. Some were no larger than a grain of sand, while others grew longer than a human forearm. They lived in shallow waters, deep oceans, and everywhere in between, filling niches as hunters, scavengers, and grazers. In a time when life was still new and chaotic, trilobites managed to adapt to nearly every environment the seas had to offer. Their most striking feature was their armor. Trilobites wore a hard exoskeleton divided into three distinct sections, which is where their name comes from. This segmented armor not only protected them from predators, but also allowed them to roll into tight defensive balls, much like a pill bug does today. Some fossils show trilobites preserved in this curled up position, caught in the act of shielding themselves against an attack. The ability to fold into a living shield was a powerful defense, especially in seas filled with sharp-toothed hunters. Yet trilobites were not all alike. Their armor took on extraordinary shapes and decorations. Some developed long spines that stretched backward like spears, making them difficult to swallow. Others carried horns, ridges, or elaborate crests, features that may have served as deterrents, displays, or even aids in sensing the water around them. In some species, spines sprouted in such profusion that the animal looked more like a drifting thistle than a creature of the sea. These adaptations suggest that survival in the Cambrian and later periods demanded creativity, and trilobites were masters at reshaping themselves to meet the challenge. Their eyes were another wonder. Trilobites were among the first animals to evolve complex visual systems, and they achieved this in ways that remain unique in the history of life. Many species had compound eyes similar to those of modern insects and crustaceans, built from countless small lenses working together, but in trilobites, some of these lenses were made from calcite crystal, the very same mineral found in limestone. This gave them durable, long-lasting eyes that could survive fossilization, providing scientists with exquisite detail. Imagine looking into the face of a creature more than 400 million years old and seeing the precise pattern of its eyes still intact, tiny windows of crystal that once captured the shimmer of ancient seas. The diversity of trilobite eyes also reflected their varied lifestyles. Some species had large eyes positioned high on their heads, giving them a wide field of view to scan for predators or prey. Others had smaller eyes or even lost them altogether, suggesting they lived in dark environments where sight was less important. In some, the lenses formed long, tower-like structures, allowing them to see above the sediment while the rest of their bodies stayed hidden. Vision was not just a tool but an art form, sculpted into countless designs over millions of years. Beyond their defenses and senses, trilobites also left behind evidence of their behavior. Fossilized tracks and burrows record the paths they took across the seafloor. Some show neat lines where trilobites moved in groups, perhaps migrating or feeding together. Others reveal sudden turns and scrambles, moments when danger must have loomed above. These traces offer a glimpse into daily life that body fossils alone cannot provide, showing that trilobites were not static creatures but active participants in their world. As the Paleozoic era unfolded, trilobites flourished through multiple mass extinctions, adapting and re-emerging with new forms. Their resilience was remarkable, but even they could not survive forever. By the end of the Permian period, nearly all trilobites were gone, victims of the greatest extinction in Earth's history. Yet during their reign, they had explored every corner of the oceans, testing shapes, strategies, and behaviors that would influence marine ecosystems for ages to come. On the ancient seafloor, these armored travelers were as common as grains of sand, their crystal eyes catching the glint of light, their spines and horns bristling against the currents. They remind us that success in evolution is not always about size or ferocity, but about adaptability and persistence. From the shadow of predators like Anomalocaris to the changing tides of deep time, trilobites endured. And as the Cambrian seas continued to transform, new challengers emerged, creatures that pushed the boundaries of scale and power in ways that would once again alter the balance of life. Among them were the giant sea scorpions, predators that would stalk the shores with bodies longer than a person is tall. In the long history of life beneath the waves, there were moments when the seas were ruled not by fish or reptiles, but by arthropods, distant cousins of modern crabs and spiders. Among them were the Eurypterids, often called the sea scorpions, though they were not true scorpions as we know them today. These creatures emerged in the Paleozoic seas and rivers, and some species reached sizes that seem almost impossible for their kind. The largest of them could grow longer than a human, stretching more than 8 feet from head to tail. Imagine wading into a shallow shoreline nearly 400 million years ago, where the water is warm and the mud is thick with life. From beneath the surface rises a broad, armored shape. A pair of claws extend forward, opening and closing like pincers ready to seize. The body behind them is flat and wide, built for gliding along the bottom. With a sudden flick of its tail-like appendage, the creature propels itself forward. This was a Eurypterid, an apex hunter of its time, moving through rivers and coastal seas with the same confidence that modern crocodiles bring to their waters. Their armor was a defining feature. Plates of hard exoskeleton covered their bodies, segment by segment, creating a shield against both attack and the changing pressures of water. Fossils show remarkable detail of these plates, some with patterns and textures that once shone with a glossy surface. Beneath this armor, the sea scorpion carried jointed legs that allowed it to crawl on land for brief excursions, though it was primarily a creature of the shallows. The larger species would have been heavy and awkward out of the water, but in their native environment, they were graceful and powerful. The Eurypterids were skilled hunters, using their claws and spiny limbs to grasp prey. They likely fed on fish, trilobites, and smaller arthropods, overpowering them with sudden bursts of speed. Some species had paddle-like limbs that acted as oars, allowing them to swim with surprising agility despite their size. Their eyes, positioned on top of their heads, gave them a wide field of vision for spotting movement in the water around them. It is easy to picture a Eurypterid lurking in the shallows, waiting for an unsuspecting creature to stray too close, then surging forward with a swift snap of its claws. Yet even these giants were not invincible. Their size made them formidable, but it also made them targets. Larger fish that evolved later in the Paleozoic seas would have seen eurypterids as valuable meals, armored but not impenetrable. Bite marks found on eurypterid fossils tell of struggles in which they were not the victor. The evolutionary arms race meant that while sea scorpions once ruled as predators, they also found themselves increasingly vulnerable as new hunters appeared. The sheer range of eurypterid species is astonishing. Some were small, no bigger than a hand, creeping quietly along the bottoms of ancient streams. Others were titans of their ecosystems, dominating both rivers and coastal shallows. They lived in environments from brackish lagoons to freshwater rivers, a versatility that helped them thrive for more than 200 million years. Their fossils are found across the world, from North America to Europe and beyond, showing that they were once among the most widespread arthropods on Earth. These sea scorpions remind us of how different ancient shorelines must have looked. Instead of crabs scuttling sideways or lobsters waving antennae, there were long, flat predators sweeping the shallows with claws extended. Instead of fish schools ruling the water, armored eurypterids glided like shadows, their paddle limbs stirring the sediment in their wake. Theirs was a world in transition, where the familiar outlines of modern marine life were only beginning to take shape. Over time, the balance of power shifted. As jawed fish grew larger and more advanced, eurypterids began to fade. Their once dominant role as shoreline predators diminished until, by the end of the Permian period, they vanished entirely in the great extinction that erased so much of early marine diversity. But during their reign, they were unmatched, the armored overlords of rivers and seas, both hunters and hunted in an era of constant change. From these shadowy hunters of the shallows, the story of the oceans moves forward again into an age when fish themselves became monsters. In the Devonian seas, armored giants like Dunkleosteus would rise, creatures with jaws strong enough to crush through bone and shell, reshaping life in the oceans yet again. In the Devonian seas, often called the Age of Fishes, the waters swarmed with new shapes and possibilities. Coral reefs flourished, shoals of early fish darted in shifting schools, and strange armored creatures explored every niche. Among this vibrant and dangerous world lived one of the most fearsome hunters ever to swim the oceans. Its name was Dunkleosteus, a predator so powerful that its bite force has been compared to that of the greatest animals of any age. Dunkleosteus was a placoderm, a type of fish that wore armor across its head and front body. Thick plates of bone overlapped to form a skull that looked almost mechanical, like the helmet of a knight. Unlike modern sharks or bony fishes, it had no true teeth. Instead, the edges of its jaw were formed from sharpened plates of bone that rubbed against one another, honing themselves into cutting edges. With every snap of its mouth, Dunkleosteus carried blades built into its very skull. This predator could grow to lengths of over 20 feet, making it one of the largest animals of its time. Picture a massive body gliding through the water, its armored head shining faintly as light filtered down through the Devonian Sea. When it lunged at prey, its jaw could open in less than a fraction of a second, creating a sudden suction that pulled animals straight into its waiting mouth. Once inside, there was little hope of escape. The biting force of Dunkleosteus has been estimated at more than 10,000 pounds per square inch, greater than the crushing jaws of a crocodile or even the bite of a great white shark. It could shear through armor and bone as if they were nothing. The power of this bite gave Dunkleosteus access to food that other predators could not touch. Trilobites, with their hard exoskeletons, stood little chance against its crushing plates. Early sharks and other armored fish were also prey, swallowed whole or bitten clean in half. Even creatures with shells that might have deterred smaller hunters were vulnerable. Fossil evidence shows bones and shells bearing the marks of Dunkleosteus jaws, scars that speak of sudden violence in the depths. And yet, despite its strength, Dunkleosteus was not a sleek, streamlined animal. Its body behind the armored head was relatively soft and flexible, lacking the heavy plating that shielded its skull. This combination of heavy armor at the front and lighter flesh at the back gave it both protection and maneuverability. Its tail was powerful, propelling it forward in bursts of speed when hunting, while its broad body allowed it to control its position in the water. For an animal of such size, it was remarkably agile. The Devonian seas were full of competition, and Dunkleosteus stood at the top. No other predator matched its combination of size, armor, and bite force. It was an apex hunter in every sense, shaping the evolution of the creatures around it. Prey species had to adapt with new defenses, faster movements, or behaviors that helped them avoid its attention. Just as Anomalocaris had driven the Cambrian arms race long before, Dunkleosteus pushed the Devonian world into a new era of survival challenges. There is also something unsettling about the fossil remains of this animal. The armored skulls are often all that is found, the rest of the body rarely preserved. When mounted in museums, the massive jaws stare outward, frozen in a permanent snarl, while the imagination fills in the missing flesh. The absence of the body adds to its mystery, making Dunkleosteus a half-known terror, glimpsed only in fragments yet vivid in the mind. For millions of years, Dunkleosteus ruled the seas, but like many dominant creatures, it eventually disappeared. Its lineage of armored placoderms faded, leaving the oceans to sharks and other fish that would rise in their absence. Still, the story of this giant remains etched in stone, a reminder of how strange and formidable life could be in the distant past. From the armored jaws of Dunkleosteus, the Devonian seas shift toward even more variety. Other fish experimented with body shapes and strange adaptations, some bizarre enough to rival the oddities of the Cambrian. Among them were species with fins shaped like anvils, living fossils that carried traits linking sea to land, and reefs that stretched further than anything we know today. These armored oddities of the Devonian formed another chapter in the restless creativity of ancient oceans. The Devonian period, often called the Age of Fishes, was a time when the seas seemed to experiment with every possible form of life. It was an age of invention, where body plans stretched the imagination and where creatures tested out shapes and adaptations that still leave scientists astonished today. Among the strangest were armored fish and peculiar swimmers that carried clues about the transition from water to land. These animals and their odd designs shaped ecosystems that were among the most complex the planet had ever seen up to that point. One of the most unusual of the Devonian fish was Stethocanthus, a shark-like creature with a silhouette that looked almost comical at first glance. Its body resembled that of a small shark, but rising from its back was a large, flat structure shaped like an anvil or a table. This dorsal fin was covered in tiny, tooth-like scales that gave it a rough surface, almost like sandpaper. For decades, scientists puzzled over this odd feature. Some suggested it was used in mating displays, a way for males to impress or challenge rivals. Others believed it might have played a role in defense, making the fish appear larger and less appealing to predators. Whatever the true purpose, the anvil-shaped fin of Stethocanthus remains one of the most bizarre experiments in fish anatomy, a feature found in no other animal before or since. While Stethocanthus represented one branch of strangeness, other Devonian fish were quietly laying the groundwork for the future of life on Earth. The coelacanths, for example, swam through these waters with their distinctive lobed fins. Unlike the thin, ray-like fins of most fish, coelacanth fins were fleshy and muscular, with bones inside that looked surprisingly similar to the limbs of land animals. These fins could paddle with strength and precision, allowing the fish to hover in place or move with deliberate control. Fossils show that coelacanths were already present in the Devonian seas, and remarkably, their lineage has survived into the modern day. The discovery of living coelacanths in the 20th century stunned the scientific world, as these creatures had been thought extinct for tens of millions of years. Alongside the coelacanths were the lungfish, another group of pioneers. These creatures carried not only gills but also primitive lungs, allowing them to gulp air from the surface. In a world where shallow waters could dry up or lose oxygen, this adaptation gave them a remarkable survival edge. Lungfish could endure in conditions that would have suffocated most other fish, and they could even wriggle from one pool to another if their habitat evaporated. In their dual abilities, lungfish carried the seeds of a transformation that would eventually allow vertebrates to walk on land. While these fish carried secrets of the future, the Devonian seas themselves were filled with intricate beauty. Coral reefs reached a level of complexity unmatched in earlier times. Built not by the same corals we know today, but by relatives and sponges, these reefs stretched for miles, forming habitats that teemed with life. Fish darted through branching structures, crustaceans scuttled across sandy bottoms, and mollusks clung to rock and coral alike. It was a world of color and motion, an underwater city built stone by tiny organisms. These reefs not only sheltered life but also created nurseries where young fish could grow safely, feeding among the shadows of towering coral structures. The Devonian seas were, in many ways, a theater of contrasts. On one side, heavily armored predators like Dunkleosteus patrolled with crushing jaws. On another, delicate reefs thrived, filled with diversity and fragile beauty. And in the shallows, odd creatures like lungfish and coelacanths practiced skills that hinted at the great leap from sea to land. Each form, whether strange or subtle, added to a growing complexity that pushed ecosystems to new heights. As time passed, the world beneath the waves continued to build on these experiments. The reefs grew denser, the fish more varied, and the interactions between species more intricate. But the seas were not eternal havens. In the background, slow changes were beginning to stir that would one day threaten these delicate balances. For now, though, the Devonian remained a masterpiece of biological creativity, a canvas where armored oddities, lung-breathing pioneers, and vibrant reefs painted a picture of oceans at their peak. From these flourishing habitats and strange designs, the story of the seas moves forward once more into an era that would test the resilience of life itself. Before the age of catastrophe arrived, the Permian seas brimmed with forms both familiar and alien, building new chapters on the foundation laid by the Devonian world. The Permian period was a time when the oceans were alive with abundance, yet beneath the surface of this apparent stability, quiet signs of strain were beginning to spread. For millions of years, these waters had been home to rich and varied ecosystems, and in many ways, they looked like a continuation of the flourishing seas that had developed in the Devonian. But the creatures that filled them carried unique stories, and the chemistry of the water was slowly shifting in ways that would change everything. Among the most striking inhabitants of the Permian seas were the Ammonites. These spiral-shelled mollusks, relatives of the modern squid and octopus, drifted through the water like coiled jewels. Each chamber of their shell was carefully partitioned, filled with gas or liquid that allowed the animal to control its buoyancy. Ammonites were hunters, using tentacles to snatch prey such as small fish and plankton. They came in an astonishing range of shapes and sizes, from shells no larger than a coin to ones as wide as a human, some coiled tightly, while others stretched into loose spirals that looked like abstract sculptures. Alongside them swam their close cousins, the nautiloids, with straighter shells or elegant curves. These creatures had already survived for hundreds of millions of years, adapting to shifting oceans and changing climates, and during the Permian, they remained a familiar sight in the open seas. The reefs of the Permian were not the coral reefs we know today. Instead, they were built largely by sponges, along with other organisms that cemented themselves together to form vast structures. These sponge reefs stretched for miles, creating intricate walls and labyrinths beneath the waves. Their texture was rough and porous, and their towers provided homes for countless other animals. Fish darted among their nooks, crustaceans hid in their crevices, and mollusks clung to their surfaces. The sight would have been dazzling, like an underwater metropolis, except the architects were creatures far simpler than modern reef builders. The very fact that sponges, some of the most ancient and basic animals on Earth, could create such immense and thriving environments is one of the quiet marvels of the Permian seas. The waters themselves, however, carried subtle warnings. Scientists studying rocks and fossils from this time have found evidence that oxygen levels in the oceans were beginning to fluctuate. In some regions, oxygen dropped so low that large areas of seafloor may have been nearly barren of life. Acidification of the water also began to increase, weakening shells and making it harder for some organisms to thrive. These changes were not immediate or obvious to the creatures of the time. To them, the seas must have still seemed full of opportunity, yet slowly, conditions were turning unstable. It is as if the stage was still set for a grand performance, but the foundations of the theater were beginning to crack. Despite these hidden stresses, the diversity of the seas was still remarkable. Armored fish, sharks, and invertebrates filled the water alongside ammonites and nautiloids. Brachiopods, animals with hard shells that looked like clams, carpeted the seafloor in great numbers. Sea lilies swayed on their stalks, filtering food from the currents. Each niche of the ecosystem seemed occupied, from the reefs to the deep basins. Predators and prey chased one another in the dance of survival, and nothing on the surface hinted that this was an age approaching its end. The Permian seas, in their quiet beauty, were balanced on a knife's edge. Their sponge reefs and ammonite-filled waters represented both the resilience and fragility of marine life. As the hidden shifts in chemistry grew more pronounced, these oceans were being pushed toward a crisis that no creature could see coming. Life had endured upheaval before, adapting through earlier extinctions, but this time the challenge was greater than any the planet had ever faced. And so, as the Permian seas continued to ripple with abundance, they were also moving closer to silence. The animals within them carried on with their lives, unaware that the most profound transformation in Earth's history was drawing near. From here, the story of the oceans flows into the Great Dying, when nearly all that swam or drifted in these waters would vanish, leaving the seas eerily still. Roughly 250 million years ago, the oceans entered a chapter unlike any that had come before. It was not a moment of new invention or strange creatures pushing the boundaries of what life could be. Instead, it was a time when life faltered on a scale so vast that it nearly erased the seas altogether. This event is known today as the Permian Triassic extinction, or more hauntingly, the Great Dying. Before this cataclysm, the oceans had brimmed with variety. Ammonites drifted in spiraled shells, brachiopods clustered across the seafloor, trilobites had long held their place in history, and sponges had built sprawling reefs that stretched for miles. Predators prowled, prey scattered, and the balance of marine life seemed secure. But then, something shifted in the fabric of Earth itself, and within a geologically short time, about 9 out of every 10 marine species disappeared forever. It was the closest the seas have ever come to being silenced. The exact cause has long puzzled scientists, and the search for answers has led to theories as vast as the oceans themselves. One explanation lies in fire. In what is now Siberia, immense volcanic eruptions poured rivers of lava across the land. These eruptions were not brief outbursts. They continued for hundreds of thousands of years, releasing colossal amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. As the gases spread, the oceans absorbed them, causing the waters to grow more acidic. For creatures that relied on calcium carbonate to build shells and skeletons, this shift was devastating. Their delicate structures dissolved or weakened, and entire food chains began to collapse. Another possibility lies in suffocation. As greenhouse gases warmed the planet, oxygen levels in the oceans plummeted. Great swathes of water became anoxic, meaning there was no oxygen at all. In these vast dead zones, fish, mollusks, and corals could not survive. What had once been vibrant seabeds turned into empty plains, devoid of motion or sound. Microbes that thrived in low oxygen conditions flourished instead, releasing methane, a gas even more potent than carbon dioxide, which spiraled the warming further. The warming itself may have been unbearable. Some scientists suggest that ocean temperatures rose to levels lethal for many forms of marine life. Coral-like reef builders, brachiopods, and countless others were unable to adapt quickly enough. The delicate balance of ecosystems unraveled, one link after another, until almost nothing was left. Even the resilient trilobites, which had survived for over 200 million years through earlier extinctions, disappeared completely in this event, leaving behind only their fossilized remains as silent witnesses. The scale of loss is difficult to imagine. Entire ecosystems that had flourished for tens of millions of years vanished almost overnight in geological terms. Picture a reef teeming with life, fish weaving between its towers, mollusks clinging to its surfaces, and predators circling nearby. Then picture it empty, its builders dissolved, its inhabitants gone, the water above eerily still. It is a reminder that the oceans, though vast, are fragile, and that life is always shaped by the unseen chemistry of water, air, and stone. And yet, the story did not end in silence. As the Permian seas dimmed, new opportunities slowly emerged in the Triassic that followed. The survivors, few though they were, began to carve out new paths. In the absence of the old giants, new creatures rose to fill the space they left behind. The world would never look the same, but it would not remain empty forever. From the eerie quiet of the great dying, evolution prepared to begin again, and the oceans, once still, were poised to stir with unfamiliar life. Among those survivors were reptiles that would return to the sea and reshape its story once more. When the oceans finally stirred back to life after the devastation of the great dying, they did so with new rulers, creatures unlike anything that had come before. Among the most remarkable were the Ichthyosaurs, marine reptiles that seemed to have traded the land for the sea with astonishing grace. Their bodies were shaped by the water itself, streamlined and smooth, curving into forms that looked so much like dolphins that it is easy to mistake them for mammals at first glance. Yet these were reptiles, descended from land-dwelling ancestors, and their journey into the ocean depths reveals one of evolution's most extraordinary transformations. Ichthyosaurs first appeared in the early Triassic period, not long after the world had begun to recover from its greatest extinction. Where earlier reptiles had clung to the land, some ventured into shallow coastal waters to hunt. Over millions of years, their limbs flattened into flippers, their spines straightened into powerful tails, and their bodies stretched into hydrodynamic shapes that could slice through the sea with little resistance. The result was an animal perfectly adapted to life in open water, capable of long-distance travel, rapid bursts of speed, and dives into the deeper layers of the ocean. Their resemblance to dolphins is a striking example of convergent evolution, where unrelated animals arrive at similar solutions to the challenges of survival. Dolphins evolved much later as mammals, yet both groups found that a torpedo-like body, a strong tail, and paddle-like fins were the best design for moving through water efficiently. This parallel is not just coincidence, but a reflection of how the laws of physics shape life. The sea demands streamlining, and both reptiles and mammals, separated by vast spans of time, discovered the same elegant answer. But ichthyosaurs had features that set them apart from any other animal. One of the most astonishing was their eyes. Fossils reveal that some ichthyosaurs had eyes so large that they remain unmatched in the history of life. Measuring more than 10 inches across in certain species, these were the largest eyes ever known, larger even than those of the colossal squid. Their immense size allowed them to capture light in the darkest depths, granting vision in places where sunlight could never reach. With such adaptations, ichthyosaurs could hunt not only in the open surface waters but also in the twilight zones far below, where shadows thickened and prey darted in the half-light. Their diet has been revealed in rare but remarkable fossil discoveries. In some specimens, stomach contents were preserved, frozen in time for millions of years. Inside, the remains of squid and fish can still be seen, providing a direct glimpse into their daily lives. The sharp, conical teeth of many species were perfect for seizing slippery prey, while their speed allowed them to pursue agile animals in open water. They were not passive drifters but active predators, patrolling seas that were slowly regaining their richness. The size of ichthyosaurs varied across species. Some were modest in length, no larger than a modern dolphin, while others grew to truly staggering proportions. Shawnosaurus, one of the giants, stretched more than 50 feet from snout to tail, a reptilian leviathan that dwarfed most creatures of its age. With such immense size, ichthyosaurs were among the dominant hunters of their ecosystems, filling a role that no creature had taken since the collapse of the Permian seas. Fossil evidence also suggests they gave birth to live young at sea, a trait that freed them completely from the land. No longer did they need to crawl ashore to lay eggs. Instead, mothers carried their offspring within them, delivering them into the safety of the water itself. This adaptation marked the final step in their full commitment to the ocean, making them creatures of the deep in every sense. The ichthyosaurs thrived for more than 100 million years, evolving into countless forms that filled niches across the seas. Their eyes, their streamlined bodies, and their predatory skill made them icons of the Triassic and Jurassic oceans. As the ages turned, they shared the waters with plesiosaurs, mosasaurs, and ammonites, shaping the flow of marine ecosystems. And while their reign would one day come to an end, their story leads naturally into the next wonders of the sea, where other reptiles, with long necks and dragon-like forms, joined the ever-changing cast of ocean life. The ichthyosaurs were the first of these great marine reptiles to claim the deep, and in their sleek, dolphin-like shapes, they carried the oceans into a new era of strange and captivating life. The ichthyosaurs were not the only reptiles to master the seas after the Great Dying. As the Triassic period unfolded into the Jurassic, another lineage of marine reptiles took shape, one that carried an appearance so peculiar it has fueled endless fascination. These were the plesiosaurs, animals whose anatomy seemed almost deliberately designed to confound expectations. Their bodies were stout and broad, their limbs reshaped into four powerful flippers that moved them through the water with a steady, almost wing-like motion. But the feature that set them apart, the feature that makes them instantly recognizable in fossil hauls today, was their necks. Some species carried necks so long that they accounted for more than half the length of their bodies, topped with heads so small they looked almost delicate by comparison. The image of a plesiosaur drifting through ancient seas is striking. Picture a torso as solid as a turtle's shell, with four oar-like flippers moving in perfect rhythm. Extending from this solid core is a slender neck that stretched out like a living serpent, ending in a narrow head lined with sharp, conical teeth. The contrast between the large, muscular body and the tiny, snapping head created a form unlike anything else in Earth's history. It was a design that seemed improbable at first glance, yet these creatures thrived for tens of millions of years, filling a unique role in the oceans they called home. How they hunted has long been a subject of debate. Some scientists believe that plesiosaurs used their necks to move with subtlety, gliding close to schools of fish or clusters of squid before striking suddenly, their heads darting forward with precision. In this view, the neck was a tool of ambush, allowing the body to remain hidden in the water's shadows, while only the small head intruded into the prey's awareness. Others propose that the neck worked more like a sweeping scythe. Instead of waiting for the perfect strike, plesiosaurs may have swung their necks through shoals of fish, snapping up multiple prey in a single motion. Their teeth, thin and needle-like, were ideal for seizing slippery animals, ensuring that once caught, escape was nearly impossible. Fossil evidence has offered tantalizing glimpses of their diets. In some specimens, stomach contents have been preserved well enough to reveal the remains of small fish and cephalopods. These discoveries confirm that plesiosaurs were active hunters, feeding on the swift, elusive creatures that populated the open seas. Their anatomy suggests they could pursue prey with bursts of speed, though their overall swimming style was likely more about endurance than rapid chases. The four-flipper system, unique among large marine reptiles, allowed for smooth and sustained motion, more like the slow beating of wings than the whipping tails of ichthyosaurs or mosasaurs. The sheer length of their necks, however, raises questions that remain unsolved. In some species, the vertebrae numbered over 70, each one carefully linked to create flexibility without sacrificing strength. Carrying such a neck would have required balance and coordination, especially in an aquatic environment where drag could slow movement. Yet the persistence of this design across multiple plesiosaur families suggests it was effective. Whatever challenges the neck posed, it must have offered enough advantage to outweigh its costs. Not all plesiosaurs carried the same proportions. While some had impossibly long necks and tiny heads, others evolved shorter necks and larger skulls with more formidable teeth. These variations show that plesiosaurs were not a single kind of hunter, but a diverse group that adapted to different roles within the marine food web. Some may have specialized in small, agile prey, while others could have tackled larger animals with stronger bites. This diversity ensured their presence across vast stretches of ocean for over 100 million years. Their fossil record is wide-ranging, with discoveries made in Europe, North America, and as far as Antarctica. They swam in shallow coastal waters, hunted in deeper seas, and left behind skeletons that now reveal the story of their strange success. Even in death, their necks often tangled into elegant curves, preserved in stone as if frozen mid-strike. Each fossil is a reminder of a creature that once blurred the line between the graceful and the bizarre. From the darting speed of Ichthyosaurs to the sweeping elegance of Plesiosaurs, the seas of the Mesozoic were alive with reptiles that had reshaped themselves for life in water. And as the ages turned further into the Cretaceous, new predators emerged, carrying the power and ferocity of lizards, but stretched into titans of the deep. Among them were the Mosasaurs, sea dragons that ruled with strength rather than stealth. The seas of the Cretaceous period were ruled by predators unlike any that had swum before. After the reign of Ichthyosaurs and Plesiosaurs began to wane, another lineage of reptiles rose to dominance. These were the Mosasaurs, immense marine lizards that became the undisputed rulers of the oceans during the final chapter of the Age of Dinosaurs. Their bodies were built for strength and power, their jaws lined with sharp teeth, and their presence turned the seas into hunting grounds where few creatures could challenge them. Mosasaurs were not distant relatives of fish or ancient amphibians, but close kin to animals we still recognize today. They belonged to the same group as monitor lizards, the lineage that includes the Komodo dragon. Yet, in the Cretaceous, these reptiles abandoned the land almost entirely, adapting themselves to the ocean in ways that would make them masters of their world. Their limbs evolved into strong flippers, their tails lengthened into powerful propellers, and their bodies became streamlined for swimming. Though they had once walked on land like their cousins, Mosasaurs became creatures of the water in every sense, perfectly adapted for life in the deep. The largest Mosasaurs grew to lengths over 50 feet, making them some of the most fearsome predators to ever prowl the oceans. Their heads were massive, their jaws lined with rows of sharp conical teeth that could seize and tear prey with ease. These jaws were double-hinged, allowing them to swallow large animals whole, much like snakes do today. Their long, muscular tails provided bursts of speed that let them ambush prey with terrifying efficiency. Few creatures in the seas could hope to escape once a mosasaur had fixed its gaze upon them. Fossils reveal that mosasaurs fed on a wide variety of prey. The remains of fish, turtles, ammonites, and even other mosasaurs have been found in their stomach cavities. Their teeth, often worn or broken, suggest they hunted aggressively, grappling with prey that fought back. Some fossils even show deep scars and healed wounds, evidence of violent encounters not only with prey but with rivals. These marks speak of a world where survival was a constant battle and where dominance of the seas was won through raw strength and persistence. Perhaps one of the most fascinating insights into their lives comes from evidence that mosasaurs gave birth to live young at sea. Unlike reptiles that must crawl onto land to lay eggs, mosasaurs were fully committed to the water. Their young were born in open ocean, already adapted to swim and fend for themselves. This adaptation freed them from the need to ever return to the shore, making them true ocean dwellers from the very beginning of life to the end. In this way, they shared a strategy with ichthyosaurs before them, ensuring their dominance over marine ecosystems for millions of years. The fossil record of mosasaurs is wide and rich. Their remains have been uncovered across Europe, North America, Africa, and beyond, showing that they spread through nearly every sea on Earth. Some species were slender and agile, built for chasing smaller, faster prey. Others were massive and robust, with crushing jaws capable of cracking the shells of turtles or ammonites. This diversity allowed mosasaurs to fill many roles in the oceans, from swift hunters to apex predators at the very top of the food chain. Their rise to power came during a time when ecosystems were already complex and full of competition. Ammonites still coiled through the seas, plesiosaurs lingered in certain regions, and fish of every size darted in schools across reefs and open waters. Yet mosasaurs carved out a supremacy that left their mark not only in fossils, but in the scars they left on their rivals. They were, in every sense, the dragons of the sea, immense lizards that dominated through ferocity, adaptability, and sheer size. The story of the mosasaurs carries the oceans closer to the dramatic close of the Cretaceous, when a single asteroid would rewrite the history of life. But before that cataclysm arrived, these reptiles had already shown the full power of evolution's creativity, transforming humble, lizard-like beginnings into rulers of the deepest seas. From their battles etched into bone to the young they birthed far from any shore, mosasaurs remind us how strange and extraordinary the oceans of the past once were, and how often life has reinvented itself to command the water. Ammonites were among the most captivating creatures ever to inhabit the seas, their shells curling into spirals that seemed almost too perfect to be real. For over 300 million years, they drifted through the oceans, their delicate forms and intricate designs etched into stone across every continent. They were cephalopods, close kin to squid and octopuses, yet their beauty and resilience made them stand apart. Each fossil that survives today is not just a record of life but a frozen glimpse of patterns so alien that they could easily be mistaken for works of art. The shells of ammonites were their most striking feature. Some formed tight spirals, each chamber stacked neatly against the last, while others stretched into loose coils or even odd, irregular twists that bent the rules of geometry. These patterns were not only beautiful but practical. Inside each chamber, the animal controlled buoyancy by filling the space with either gas or fluid. With this delicate balance, ammonites could rise toward the sunlit surface or sink into the dimmer depths, moving almost effortlessly between layers of the sea. Their mobility made them versatile hunters, drifting quietly one moment and darting forward the next when prey came within reach. Their bodies lived within the final, outermost chamber of the shell, while the rest of the spiral formed a structure of both elegance and utility. Long tentacles extended from their soft bodies, grasping at fish, plankton, or drifting invertebrates. Fossil evidence suggests they were opportunistic feeders, able to adapt their diet to whatever was available. This flexibility, combined with their mastery of buoyancy, was one of the secrets to their long survival. They endured changes in climate, fluctuations in sea levels, and even earlier extinction events that toppled entire ecosystems, yet they always managed to recover and thrive again. The variety among ammonites was astonishing. Some grew shells barely larger than a coin, while others reached sizes over 6 feet across, their spirals so massive they must have glimmered like living sculptures as they drifted through ancient seas. Their shells carried ridges, ribs, or intricate patterns that scientists believe may have strengthened them against predators or pressure. Though some may have been simple evolutionary flourishes, shapes that served little purpose beyond chance. Whatever their reason, the diversity of ammonite shells remains one of the most breathtaking examples of natural design in the fossil record. Ammonites were also remarkable timekeepers of Earth's history because their species changed so quickly and spread so widely. Paleontologists use their fossils to date layers of rock with extraordinary precision. A single fragment of ammonite shell can reveal not just the age of the rock it was found in, but the ancient environment in which it was laid down. They are, in many ways, storytellers of prehistory, whispering from stone about seas that rose and fell long before humanity walked the land. Despite their resilience, Ammonites were not immortal. For hundreds of millions of years they had survived, but when the asteroid struck at the end of the Cretaceous period, their long history came to a sudden end. Along with the dinosaurs and many marine reptiles, the Ammonites vanished. Their shells, once drifting through the oceans, now lie silent in cliffs and riverbeds, reminders of a lineage that seemed unshakable until the moment it was gone. Yet their story lingers in more than stone. Their closest living relatives, the nautiluses, still patrol the deep waters of today's oceans, carrying coiled shells that echo the Ammonites' spirals. Every chambered curve in a nautilus shell feels like an echo from another age, a fragile continuation of a dynasty that once ruled the seas. From the elegance of Ammonite spirals, the story of the oceans moves naturally to another group that shaped their destiny. Sharks, with their endless variety of teeth and forms, were also evolving in strange directions during this same time, carving out their role as survivors in seas that were as dangerous as they were beautiful. Long before the oceans of the Mesozoic teemed with Plesiosaurs, Mosasaurs, and Ammonites, another lineage of predators had already staked its claim to the seas. Sharks, those ancient hunters that glide through our waters today, trace their story back more than 400 million years, deep into the Devonian period. They were present long before the first forests spread across the land or the earliest vertebrates crawled onto shore. And though they looked different from the sleek shapes we recognize now, these early sharks carried within them the beginnings of a design so enduring that it has survived nearly every catastrophe the earth has endured. The earliest sharks were strange to behold. Their bodies lacked the rigid bones of many other fish, relying instead on skeletons made of cartilage, which gave them both lightness and flexibility. Fossils from these times reveal forms that were more bizarre than familiar. Some had broad, flattened heads with wide mouths stretching across their faces. Others carried spines and fins that looked almost ornamental, rising like sails along their backs. They were not yet the streamlined hunters of modern oceans, but a varied collection of experiments, as evolution tested different ways of shaping a predator. One of the most remarkable examples of shark oddity was Helicoprion, a creature that swam through the seas roughly 270 million years ago. What set Helicoprion apart was its extraordinary jaw. Instead of rows of teeth like most sharks, it carried a spiraling whorl of teeth that uncurled like the blade of a circular saw. This buzzsaw jaw sat in the lower mouth, a rolling spiral where old teeth remained fused as new ones grew, creating a coil that may have reached nearly a meter in diameter in the largest individuals. For over a century, scientists puzzled over where this bizarre structure fit on the animal. Some early reconstructions placed it outside the mouth like a weaponized saw, while others imagined it as a strange appendage on the snout. Only with modern studies and CT scans did the picture become clearer. The spiral sat inside the jaw, slicing through prey with a motion as unsettling as it was effective. Sharks of the Carboniferous period, sometimes called the Age of Sharks, added even more variety to the story. Some species grew long, eel-like bodies suited to weaving through dense reefs and mangroves. Others carried elaborate dorsal fins, such as Stethocanthus with its flat, anvil-shaped fin covered in rough denticles. There were sharks with teeth shaped like scissors, some designed for crushing shells, and others for slicing flesh. Each form was a response to the environments of the time, proof of the adaptability that would become the hallmark of their lineage. What truly set sharks apart was not just their variety, but their resilience. Unlike many other groups, they weathered mass extinctions that wiped out entire ecosystems. They survived the Devonian crises, the Permian collapse, and the asteroid that ended the age of dinosaurs. Each time, their populations dwindled, yet they recovered, reshaping themselves to fit the new oceans left behind. The secret lay partly in their simplicity. A skeleton of cartilage, rows of replaceable teeth, and a body tuned for efficient movement gave them advantages in almost any environment. Their sensory systems added to this. Sharks evolved electroreceptors that could detect the faintest pulses of electricity given off by living prey, along with acute senses of smell and hearing. These traits made them formidable hunters even in murky or dark waters. Over the course of their history, sharks evolved into both giants and specialists. Some grew massive, like the early ancestors of the great white, while others became small, bottom-dwelling creatures suited for scavenging. Their adaptability allowed them to thrive in shallow seas, deep oceans, and even freshwater rivers. No matter how the world changed, sharks found a way to remain. The endurance of sharks is a story of quiet persistence. While many other ocean giants rose and fell, their reigns cut short by extinction, sharks continued, shifting their forms but never surrendering their role as predators. Today, when a shark moves through the water with calm efficiency, it carries within its shape the echoes of hundreds of millions of years of survival. From the alien spirals of Ammonites, the oceans now open to these ancient hunters, creatures whose strange beginnings and enduring designs marked them as some of evolution's greatest survivors. Ahead in the story of the seas, other communities would flourish, filling the ocean floors with forests, not of trees, but of living animals swaying in the currents. The Carboniferous period, beginning more than 300 million years ago, is often remembered for its endless swamps and towering forests of giant ferns and horsetails on land. But beneath the waves, another kind of forest stretched across the seafloor, one that had no leaves or wood, and yet looked just as lush and alive. These were the crinoid forests, vast underwater gardens built not by plants but by animals. They were composed of crinoids, relatives of modern sea lilies and feather stars, creatures that blurred the line between flower and animal. Imagine descending through shallow seas where sunlight filtered down in soft beams, illuminating a world that seemed to blossom from stone. Rising from the seabed were long, slender stalks, each tipped with a crown of feathery arms. To the casual eye, they looked like meadows of flowers, gently swaying with the currents. But instead of soaking in sunlight like plants, these living forests captured drifting plankton from the water, using their delicate arms as nets. The currents became their sustenance, carrying food to each waiting crown. The crinoids anchored themselves in colonies so dense that the seafloor disappeared beneath them. Fossil beds reveal layer upon layer of their remains, carpeting ancient seas for miles. Their stalks rose at different heights, some only a few inches tall, others stretching several feet, creating a tiered canopy where smaller creatures found shelter. Fish darted among the waving arms, crustaceans crawled along the stalks, and mollusks nestled in the spaces between. These forests were not only strange in appearance but vital ecosystems, supporting countless other species that relied on them for protection and food. Their bodies were made of calcite, the same mineral found in limestone, which is why so many fossil beds preserve them in exquisite detail. Entire slabs of rock are patterned with their stems, broken into discs that resemble coins. In fact, in some regions, These fossilized stem pieces became known as street Cuthbert's beads or fairy money, tokens of mystery discovered by people long after the animals themselves had vanished. These remains give us a glimpse of just how widespread crinoid forests once were. Unlike coral reefs, which build towering stone frameworks over time, crinoid forests were alive in a more flexible, shifting way. Each stalk could bend with the water's flow, and their feathery arms moved with the currents, opening and closing to trap food. This constant, gentle swaying gave the seabed an almost dreamlike quality, as if the ocean itself were breathing through fields of living flowers. It is easy to imagine how mesmerizing these landscapes would have been, with endless meadows rising and falling in rhythm with the tide. The Carboniferous oceans themselves were rich and diverse. The shallow continental seas provided ideal conditions for crinoid colonies to thrive. High oxygen levels and stable coastlines meant these gardens could expand across enormous areas. They lived alongside brachiopods, trilobites, and early sharks, each adding to the vibrant picture of life in these waters. For predators, the dense crinoid fields provided both obstacles and opportunities, places where small prey could hide and larger hunters could prowl in search of openings. Though they looked fragile, crinoids endured for millions of years. Their success lay in their adaptability. Some species grew tall and anchored themselves firmly to the seabed, while others drifted freely, able to move with currents to find new feeding grounds. The combination of fixed colonies and free floaters made them versatile, spreading across both shallow and deeper waters. For a time, these animals dominated entire marine landscapes, transforming the appearance of the oceans as completely as forests transform the land. Today, only a fraction of that diversity remains. Modern crinoids are far less common, clinging to steep slopes or hiding in deeper seas. They are reminders of a time when the seafloor itself resembled a living garden, when oceans shimmered with fields of swaying crowns instead of empty plains. The fossils they left behind, etched into limestone cliffs and riverbeds, are fragments of that forgotten landscape, silent records of seas that once bloomed with animal forests. From these carboniferous gardens, where animals posed as flowers and currents fed entire ecosystems, the story of the seas moves further into the mysteries of deep time. The oceans were not only places of light and color, but also of hidden brilliance, where even the darkness itself could glow with living light. Long before the first forests stood on land, and long before animals with skeletons filled the seas, there may already have been light in the oceans. Not sunlight filtering down through the waves, but living light, faint and ghostly, flickering from the bodies of tiny organisms. The origins of bioluminescence stretch so far back into deep time that they blur into mystery. Yet scientists believe its first sparks may have glowed in the Precambrian seas more than 500 million years ago. The earliest candidates for this ability were not animals but microbes. Certain bacteria are capable of producing light through chemical reactions, releasing a glow that can seem like fire trapped in a droplet. In modern oceans, these bacteria still exist, often living symbiotically inside larger hosts. Some scientists suggest that similar microbes may have already developed this trick hundreds of millions of years before the Cambrian explosion. If so, they may have been the first sparks of bioluminescence, casting pale light into waters that otherwise sank into complete darkness. The question of why light would evolve in the first place is just as intriguing. In the open ocean, darkness is the rule rather than the exception. Beyond the shallow sunlit layer, the sea becomes dim, then black, stretching down for miles into abyssal plains where no star or moonbeam can reach. In such an environment, even the faintest glow could carry great advantage. For some microbes, light may have served as a lure, attracting larger hosts that would swallow them and then provide a safe home within. For others, it may have been a signal, a way to communicate in the dark, or perhaps even a kind of camouflage, blending their glow with the faint shimmer of starlight above to make them less visible to predators. As time moved into the Cambrian period, when animal life diversified into strange and alien forms, it is possible that more complex organisms began to adopt bioluminescence for themselves. The fossil record is largely silent on this because soft-bodied creatures and faint light leave little trace in stone. Yet by comparing ancient possibilities with modern reality, scientists can piece together a picture. Today, bioluminescence is found across a dizzying array of ocean creatures, from fish to jellyfish to squid to crustaceans. The fact that so many unrelated groups have it suggests that the trait evolved many times, independently, in response to the same pressure. The darkness of the sea. Modern deep-sea life provides a window into what those ancient first glows might have looked like. In the midnight zone, where no sunlight penetrates, fish drift with lanterns built into their bodies. The anglerfish, for instance, dangles a glowing lure from its head to draw curious prey close enough to strike. Jellyfish pulse with rings of light that ripple down their gelatinous bells, confusing predators or startling attackers long enough to escape. Tiny plankton flash bright blue when disturbed, turning entire waves into glowing ribbons when the sea is stirred by wind or the stroke of a swimmer's hand. Each display of light has its own purpose, whether for hunting, defense, or communication, and each echoes the same idea. In the deep, light is survival. The thought that similar displays may have existed hundreds of millions of years ago is haunting. Imagine Precambrian seas, seemingly barren under the cover of night, punctuated by soft sparks from drifting bacteria or faint glimmers from early plankton. To the first complex animals, these lights would have been both warning and invitation, signals written across the darkness of the ancient oceans. They may have guided early hunters, helped prey avoid being eaten, or even played a role in the evolutionary arms race that produced the strange body forms of the Cambrian explosion. Though we may never know exactly when the first glow appeared, the persistence of bioluminescence in so many modern species suggests it has been part of the ocean's story for an unimaginably long time. It is one of nature's most enduring tricks, born in the depths and carried forward into every era. From the possible glow of ancient microbes to the radiant lanterns of anglerfish today, living light has been woven into the fabric of the sea. From these faint Precambrian sparks, the story of the oceans flows into another mystery, one preserved not in light but in stone. Delicate creatures, too soft to survive the ages, sometimes left their impressions in rare fossil beds, giving us fleeting glimpses of worlds that should have vanished without a trace. Most fossils we know are of hard things, the bones of dinosaurs, the shells of ammonites, or the armored plates of fish. Soft bodies almost never last. They decay quickly, melting back into the earth long before stone can capture their outline. And yet, scattered across the world, there are rare places where time has been generous, where even the most fragile of forms were preserved. These deposits hold not just bones and shells, but whole creatures, skin, organs, and soft tissues intact, allowing us to peer into ancient lives with a clarity that feels almost impossible. Among the most famous of these are the Burgess Shale of Canada and the Chengjiang deposits of China, both windows into worlds that should have vanished without a trace. The Burgess Shale lies high in the Canadian Rockies in British Columbia and dates back over 500 million years to the Cambrian period. At the time, it was not a mountain but a shallow seafloor near the edge of a reef. Mudslides from the reef tumbled down, burying entire communities of creatures in fine sediments. These sediments worked like a protective blanket, sealing off the animals from oxygen and scavengers. What followed was extraordinary, the preservation of not just skeletons, but eyes, gills, stomachs, and even the faint impressions of muscles and nerves. Creatures that would normally dissolve into nothing left behind ghostly outlines, details so fine that scientists can still trace the spines of worms or the delicate fronds of filter feeders. Within the Burgess Shale, some of the strangest creatures of the Cambrian explosion were found. There was Opabinia, with its 5 eyes and long trunk-like appendage. Hallucigenia, once reconstructed upside down, carried spines along its back like tiny spears. Morella, a delicate arthropod with fringed limbs, swam with elegance through those ancient seas. Trilobites were there as well, but here, unlike in other deposits, even their antennae and soft legs were preserved. These fossils revealed not only what the Cambrian seas looked like, but also how alien and creative evolution's experiments could be. Without the Burgess Shale, many of these creatures would be entirely unknown. Half a world away, in Yunnan province, China, another treasure was waiting. The Chengjiang fossil beds are even older than the Burgess Shale, dating back about 520 million years. They too preserved delicate soft-bodied organisms, locking into stone the details of animals at the dawn of complex life. The fine-grained mud of the Chengjiang site, combined with sudden burial events, created a record so vivid that even traces of internal organs can be seen in some fossils. The creatures of Chengjiang echo those of the Burgess Shale, but also add new surprises. Early ancestors of arthropods scuttled across the seafloor, their segmented bodies preserved in detail. Primitive fish-like forms appear as well, some of the earliest known vertebrates, giving a glimpse into the origins of backbones. Even jellyfish-like animals, so fragile that they vanish within hours today, left faint outlines of their bells and tentacles. The Chengjiang fossils showed that the explosion of diversity during the Cambrian was not just a Canadian phenomenon, but a global flowering of life, spreading across oceans in forms as strange as they were beautiful. The conditions that allow for such preservation are incredibly rare. Normally, when an animal dies, bacteria and scavengers dismantle it quickly. Soft tissues are lost before burial, leaving behind only the durable parts. For soft-bodied creatures to survive in the fossil record, several things must happen at once. They must be buried almost instantly by fine sediments that protect them from oxygen and decay. The waters must be low in oxygen, slowing bacterial activity. Minerals in the mud must replace tissues at a microscopic level, capturing even the most delicate structures before they vanish. It is a combination of chance and chemistry, a perfect storm that only a few places in Earth's history have ever offered. These fossils change everything we know about ancient oceans. Without them, we would imagine the Cambrian as a world of shells and armor, dominated by trilobites and hard-bodied hunters. Instead, we now see that it was a theater of soft forms, creatures without shells or bones, drifting, crawling, and swimming in endless variety. They remind us that much of life's story is hidden, erased by time, and that what we do find is only a fraction of what once existed. From the ghostly imprints of these delicate bodies, the story of the oceans turns toward the smallest builders of all. Not all fossils are grand in size. Some are microscopic, yet they shaped the seafloor itself and left behind records that still help scientists read the long history of climate and change. The story of the oceans is often told through giants: the Ammonites with their vast coiled shells, the Mosasaurs with their lizard like power, the Ichthyosaurs with their great unblinking eyes. But the history of the seas is also written in the tiniest of forms, creatures so small that they can only be seen through a microscope. These are the makers of microfossils, delicate skeletons and shells that drifted through ancient waters and settled silently onto the seafloor. Though invisible to the naked eye, they left behind a record more complete and more continuous than almost anything else in the fossil record, a hidden library etched in stone grains and ocean mud. Among the most important of these are the foraminifera, tiny single-celled organisms that build intricate shells around themselves. Their shells, called tests, can be smooth and simple or spiraled and chambered in exquisite detail like miniature seashells shrunk down to the size of grains of sand. Each test is made of calcium carbonate, the same mineral used by corals and mollusks. When the foraminifera die, their shells drift downward, raining onto the seabed in such abundance that in some places they form thick deposits of chalk. The white cliffs of Dover in England, for example, are built almost entirely from the shells of microscopic organisms like these, layered over millions of years. Radiolarians tell another side of the story. Instead of calcium carbonate, they create their skeletons from silica, the same mineral found in glass. Under a microscope, radiolarians appear as delicate spheres and lattices, with spines radiating outward in symmetrical patterns that look almost too perfect to be natural. They floated through the open oceans for hundreds of millions of years, their skeletal remains sinking to form siliceous ooze on the deep sea floor. In time, these oozes hardened into rocks rich in silica, leaving behind a fossil record of remarkable beauty. Each tiny skeleton is a frozen work of geometry, capturing not only the shape of the organism, but also the conditions of the waters where it lived. Coccolithophores add yet another voice to this microscopic chorus. These single-celled algae are cloaked in plates of calcium carbonate, called coccoliths. Each plate is shaped like a shield or a scale, and together they form a covering that looks almost like delicate armor. Coccolithophores are not just passive drifters, but active players in Earth's systems as they photosynthesize, capturing sunlight and carbon dioxide to grow. When they die, their coccoliths fall into the sea, joining the endless sediment that records the story of the oceans. The sheer abundance of coccolithophores means that their remains cover vast stretches of the seafloor, building chalk deposits and limestone layers that still dominate landscapes today. The significance of these microfossils is not only in their abundance, but in what they reveal. Because different species thrive in different conditions, their presence or absence in layers of sediment acts like a diary of ancient climates. Foraminifera, in particular, are sensitive to temperature and salinity, so their fossil shells can be used to reconstruct ocean conditions at precise points in time. The chemistry of their shells, captured in oxygen isotopes, allows scientists to read the rhythms of ice ages, warm periods, and even short-term climate shifts. In this way, creatures smaller than grains of sand preserve the pulse of Earth's climate across tens of millions of years. Microfossils also trace the paths of evolution. They record the rise and fall of species with astonishing resolution, sometimes capturing changes across spans of only a few thousand years. For paleontologists, this means they can track how life responded to sudden warming, cooling, or mass extinction events with a clarity not possible from larger fossils. When the asteroid struck at the end of the Cretaceous, for example, the sudden collapse of coccolithophores and foraminifera can be seen instantly in the sediment, a sharp boundary line in stone that marks the end of an age. The beauty of these microfossils lies in their paradox. They are too small to see without magnification, yet together they reshaped the seafloor, built cliffs and mountains, and wrote the history of the oceans in layers of chalk and silica. Their silence has been louder than the roars of giant predators, for it is through them that we can now reconstruct the climates and ecosystems of worlds long gone. From this hidden record of the oceans, written by creatures invisible to the eye, the story moves toward those rare living fossils that still endure, survivors of ages past, who remind us that not all the voices of ancient seas have faded away. The story of the oceans is filled with rise and fall, with creatures that flourished for millions of years before vanishing completely. Yet, scattered among the waves are survivors, beings so ancient that they carry the shape of the seas as they once were. These are not just animals, but living echoes of prehistory, reminders that the oceans are not only home to the new, but also guardians of the old. One of the most enduring of these survivors is the horseshoe crab. With its domed shell and long, pointed tail spine, it looks more like a relic of another age than a creature belonging to the modern world. Horseshoe crabs have existed for more than 450 million years, long before the first trees spread across the continents or the first insects took flight. Their design has changed so little over time that they are often called living fossils, a phrase that captures the strange feeling of seeing something both alive and ancient. These creatures are not crabs at all, but are more closely related to spiders and scorpions. They crawl along sandy bottoms, their armored shells protecting them from predators, while their rows of blue blood carry an unusual story of survival. Unlike the red hemoglobin in our blood, their blood contains copper, turning it bright blue when exposed to air. This blood has remarkable properties, clumping around bacteria in a way that has become vital to modern medicine. Even in today's world, the survival of horseshoe crabs has meaning far beyond their age, linking them to both the distant past and the present. Another ancient survivor is the nautilus, a creature that drifts through the deep with a coiled shell that seems to belong more to an ammonite of the Cretaceous than to our modern seas. Nautiluses are cephalopods, kin to squid and octopuses, yet unlike their agile relatives, they live a slower life. Their shells, chambered in spirals of pearly white, serve as a buoyancy system. By filling the chambers with gas or liquid, the nautilus can rise and sink with ease, moving through the water like a living submarine designed millions of years ago. The resemblance of nautiluses to ammonites is no coincidence. Both belong to the same larger group, and while ammonites perished at the end of the Cretaceous, nautiluses endured. Their survival is a mystery of persistence, a story of how one branch of a lineage can continue even when others vanish completely. In the dark waters of the Indo-Pacific, they continue to glide quietly, their tentacles unfurling to grasp at food. They are the last whispers of a dynasty that once spiraled across the oceans in countless forms, carrying forward a pattern that is both alien and familiar. Perhaps the most dramatic rediscovery of a living fossil came in the year 1938, when fishermen off the coast of South Africa pulled up a catch that stunned the scientific world. Among their nets was a large armored fish with lobed fins that moved more like limbs than ordinary fins. It was a coelacanth, a creature believed to have been extinct for more than 60 million years. For decades, coelacanths had been known only through fossils, with their story thought to have ended in deep time. Yet here it was, alive, with dark blue scales and eyes adapted to the dim light of deep waters. The coelacanth is part of the lineage that once gave rise to the first land vertebrates. Its fleshy fins contain bones that resemble the early architecture of limbs, a reminder of the moment when some fish first crept toward shore. Its rediscovery was like opening a book thought to be lost, a sudden continuation of a story no one expected to read again. Today, coelacanths are rare, living in deep volcanic slopes of the Indian Ocean. Their slow movements, a reflection of a life far removed from the surface world. Together, these survivors form a quiet thread through time. Horseshoe crabs crawling onto beaches to spawn beneath the moon, nautiluses drifting through coral slopes with shells that echo lost ammonites, and coelacanths hovering in twilight waters all share the same message. They remind us that even as life transforms and disappears, some ancient shapes remain, carrying the memory of worlds long gone. And from these enduring relics, the story of the oceans shifts once more to those creatures that did not survive. Evolution has always been an experiment filled with endings, where entire lineages faded away, leaving behind fossils that whisper of possibilities that never came to be. The history of the oceans is often imagined as a steady march toward progress, as if life were climbing a ladder toward perfection. But the truth is far more intricate. Evolution is not a ladder at all. It is a tangled bush, spreading outward in countless directions, each branch representing a possibility that life once explored. Some branches thickened and grew, reaching into the future, while many others ended abruptly, broken off by the changing tides of time. What survives today is only a small fraction of the experiments that once filled the seas. Behind every living creature lies a forest of vanished forms, prototypes that lived and vanished long before we appeared. In the Cambrian seas, when evolution was bursting with creativity, strange creatures filled the waters, unlike anything we see today. Their bodies were arranged in unfamiliar ways, their limbs and eyes defying logic, their designs as fleeting as dreams. Hallucigenia, Opabinia, and Tullimonstrum are just a few names that mark these vanished lineages. Each one was a branch that once grew, flourished for a moment, and then snapped off, leaving no descendants. They are reminders that life does not only succeed, it experiments, and often those experiments come to an end. Hallucigenia was one such fleeting idea, a creature so peculiar that its fossil confounded scientists for decades. It represented a body plan that no longer exists, an odd arrangement of limbs and spines that seems almost whimsical in hindsight. Yet for a time, it was real, and it survived. Then, just as quickly, it disappeared. Its strangeness had no future. Opabinia was another, no less unusual. With its multiple eyes and reaching appendage, it looked like a collage of features borrowed from different animals. It was not a mistake, but a working design that allowed it to hunt and feed in its own way. Still, it left no living heirs. Its odd combination of traits was abandoned by evolution, preserved only in stone. And then there is Tullimonstrum, the fossil from Mazon Creek that continues to defy classification. Its very identity is still debated, with scientists unsure whether it belonged with vertebrates or with invertebrates. It seems to hover on the edge of our categories, as though it belonged to another set of rules entirely. Like the others, it too vanished without leaving descendants, a solitary branch that ended in silence. What unites these creatures is not their anatomy, but the fact that they represent evolutionary experiments that did not continue. They remind us that evolution is not a straight road leading toward humans or any other modern life form. It is a restless process of trial and error. Some designs are versatile and endure through upheavals. Others are too narrow, tied to specific conditions that cannot last. When the seas warmed, cooled, or turned acidic, When predators sharpened or prey vanished, many creatures simply could not adjust. Entire blueprints for living were abandoned, leaving behind nothing but impressions in stone. To think of them as failures is to miss their meaning. They were not mistakes, they were prototypes, attempts at survival that worked for a time but could not stretch further into the future. Their disappearance is part of the natural rhythm of life. For every successful lineage, countless others have been lost. For every fish, crab, or squid we see today, there were once entire families of creatures just as strange as Hallucigenia or Tullimonstrum, now erased from the living world. There is a quiet sadness in this thought, but also a sense of wonder. The fossil record preserves these lost branches, like pressed flowers, delicate and fragile, but still speaking across hundreds of millions of years. Each one whispers of a world that once existed, a world where the possibilities of life were wider, stranger, and less predictable than anything we know now. And from those dead ends, new forms always rose. Each vanished branch made space for others to grow. As oceans shifted, extinctions struck, and climates changed, the story of life did not end. It simply turned a page, replacing the strange prototypes with new experiments, filling the seas with different shapes and new ideas. The broken branches remain as memories in stone, while the bush of life spread onward, always outward, always restless, shaping the oceans into living laboratories that never truly stop changing. Far below the waves, past the reach of sunlight and the gentle dance of surface waters, lies a world that has always belonged to shadows. The abyssal plains, stretching across vast portions of the seafloor, are some of the most desolate yet expansive habitats on Earth. They began forming hundreds of millions of years ago as the planet's crust shifted and settled, creating immense flat regions in the deep ocean. These plains were not lifeless deserts, though they may appear empty at first glance. Over time, they became the silent stage where some of the strangest experiments of evolution unfolded. In the earliest days of the oceans, the abyss would have been very different from what it is now. Sediments rained down from above, carrying with them the remains of surface life, building soft blankets across the seafloor. As geological ages passed, these plains grew more defined, spreading out like endless sheets of darkness that covered more of the ocean floor than any coral reef or continental shelf ever could. They are the largest ecosystems on Earth, yet for much of history they remained hidden and untouched, their mysteries buried under miles of water. Life in the abyss is a story of adaptation to extremes. Here, there is no sunlight to spark photosynthesis, no plants or algae to fuel food chains. Instead, creatures survive on what drifts down from the world above, the so-called marine snow, tiny flakes of organic matter that sink slowly into the dark. Occasionally, larger meals arrive, such as the carcass of a whale tumbling to the seafloor, providing a sudden oasis of abundance that can feed whole communities for decades. These rhythms shaped how deep-sea life evolved, with strategies that seem as alien as the environments they inhabit. Some creatures developed bodies that shimmer faintly, producing their own light in a place where none from the sunlight can reach. Bioluminescence became a language of survival, a way to lure prey, evade predators, or attract mates. Others evolved oversized eyes to capture the faintest glimmers of light, or abandoned sight altogether, relying instead on delicate sensory hairs or chemical cues in the water. Many took on fragile gelatinous forms, conserving energy in a place where food was scarce. In the abyss, strength does not come from bulk or armor, but from patience, efficiency, and the ability to endure. Throughout prehistory, these adaptations mirrored those seen in today's deep-sea trenches and vents. Hydrothermal vents, where hot water rich in minerals gushes from the seafloor, created strange oases of life, even in ancient oceans. Around these vents, entire ecosystems flourished, powered not by sunlight, but by chemical reactions, a process called chemosynthesis. Tube worms, clams, and bacteria thrived in partnership, showing that life could anchor itself even in the harshest of settings. In this sense, the abyss was not only a graveyard for drifting remains, but also a cradle for new and unexpected ways of living. Fossil evidence suggests that abyssal plains developed their own communities over time, with organisms specially suited to their quiet expanses. The deep-sea relatives of crinoids, echinoderms, and mollusks once spread across these plains, moving slowly in the dark, their delicate bodies leaving only rare traces in the record. While many of these creatures vanished during mass extinctions, the abyss remained, waiting, and life always returned to fill it. In times of crisis at the surface, when reefs collapsed or coastlines changed, the deep often provided a sanctuary. It was not untouched by disaster, but its vastness and stability allowed it to persist through upheavals that reshaped the rest of the ocean. Even today, the abyss is less known to us than the surface of other planets. We have mapped Mars in more detail than the seafloor beneath our own oceans, leaving most of these plains as blank spaces in human knowledge. What little we have seen comes from robotic explorers, whose lights reveal ghostly fish with gaping mouths, jelly-like beings drifting weightlessly, and pale crustaceans scuttling across the sediment. It is not difficult to imagine that ancient seas, too, held their share of such uncanny forms, their bodies uniquely tuned to the endless night. The deep abyss through time is a reminder that the oceans are layered, each depth its own world, with its own rules. The surface teems with light and color, the midwater fills with predators and prey in constant motion, and far below, the abyss stretches silent and still, vast beyond comprehension. From the Cambrian seas to the modern age, this hidden realm has remained a constant presence, shaping and sheltering life in ways we are only beginning to understand. And as life above changed dramatically, from trilobites to ammonites to the great reptiles of the sea, the abyss remained the unchanging backdrop, its secrets still waiting to be uncovered as we sink ever deeper into its dark expanse. Drifting through the primeval oceans like living ghosts, jellyfish have been with us for hundreds of millions of years. They are among the oldest creatures that still glide through the seas today, their bodies so simple and yet so enduring that they have outlived entire dynasties of life. Unlike armored trilobites or fierce predators with teeth of bone and jaws of steel, jellyfish leave almost nothing behind. Their bodies are made mostly of water, delicate as silk threads, so when they die, they vanish into the sea without a trace. This fragility makes their presence in the fossil record one of the rarest discoveries of all. Every imprint we find in stone is a fleeting glimpse of a creature that should have dissolved long ago, preserved only because the conditions were just right. Some of the most striking impressions of ancient jellyfish come from shallow lagoons where fine sediments quickly buried their soft shapes before currents could sweep them away. These faint circular patterns, pressed into rock, reveal little more than outlines, ripples where bell-shaped bodies once pulsed gently in the water. They do not show the drifting tentacles or the mesmerizing movement that defines jellyfish today. But even those faint echoes remind us that these animals were present in oceans long before fish, reptiles, or mammals ever appeared. Their story stretches back to the Cambrian period, and perhaps even earlier, hinting at origins older than most of the creatures we think of as ancient. What makes jellyfish extraordinary is not their complexity but their lack of it. They have no brain, no bones, and no heart. Their bodies are little more than a dome of gelatinous tissue with tentacles lined with stinging cells. Yet this apparent simplicity is a strength. By avoiding the heavy investments of skeletons or shells, jellyfish could float with ease, carried by currents across vast distances. They needed little energy to survive, feeding passively on plankton and small organisms that drifted within reach of their tentacles. In the unstable and often harsh environments of the ancient seas, this minimalism proved to be one of evolution's most successful strategies. Their survival also lay in their flexibility. Jellyfish reproduce in more than one way, shifting between polyp stages attached to the seafloor and free-floating medusa stages that fill the open waters. This dual life cycle allowed them to persist through changes in climate and chemistry that wiped out other forms of life. When oceans acidified, when oxygen dropped, or when reefs collapsed, jellyfish were among the few to endure. They did not rely on shells that could dissolve in acidic seas, nor on complex structures that required stable conditions. They were adaptable in the simplest sense, continuing to drift and feed while the world around them changed. In the ecosystems of the past, jellyfish were not just survivors, they were also players in shaping food chains. Small fish and other early swimmers fed on their tentacles, while jellyfish themselves consumed the tiny plankton that filled the upper waters. They acted as both predator and prey, tying together levels of the ecosystem in ways that are easy to overlook. Fossilized gut contents of some early marine animals show remains that could only have come from soft-bodied drifters, proof that jellyfish were already woven into the fabric of life. There is also a quiet elegance in how they filled the role of transporters of energy. By feeding near the surface and then dying, their bodies sank to deeper waters, carrying nutrients into zones where sunlight could not reach. This constant rain of organic matter helped sustain communities on the seafloor, long before the rise of large animals that would later dominate marine ecosystems. Even in death, jellyfish were essential, passing energy down into the dark. The endurance of jellyfish through multiple mass extinctions is one of their most haunting qualities. While ammonites vanished and trilobites disappeared, jellyfish swam on, unaffected by the collapses that ended so many other experiments in evolution. They seemed immune to disasters that reshaped entire oceans, quietly continuing their drifting existence as if nothing had changed. To this day, their pulsating forms move through the seas almost exactly as they did in ancient times, a living window into the deep past. Alongside them, other drifters shared the waters, from comb jellies with their shimmering rows of cilia to colonial organisms that looked like floating strings of light. These creatures, too, depended on currents rather than strength, finding success in surrendering to the ocean's flow. Together, they made up a world of wanderers, soft-bodied and fragile, yet astonishingly durable across ages of upheaval. The sight of a jellyfish imprint in stone is a reminder of just how improbable their survival is and how remarkable it is that they are still here. They connect the oceans of today with seas that existed 500 million years ago, showing us that sometimes simplicity is the best path through deep time. And as the oceans shifted, darkened, and deepened, other drifters would rise to join them, carrying the story of survival into ever stranger waters. Reefs are among the most remarkable inventions of the oceans, not because they are built of stone, but because they are built by life itself. What we often imagine today as bright coral gardens, teeming with fish and color, is only the latest chapter in a story that stretches back hundreds of millions of years. Across time, reefs have risen, collapsed, and returned in entirely new forms, each cycle reshaping the seas and providing new stages for evolution to unfold. The very first reefs appeared in the Cambrian more than 500 million years ago. Their builders were not corals at all, but sponges and other simple organisms that worked together to create porous frameworks. These early reefs were not spectacular in appearance, but they were revolutionary. By lifting themselves off the seafloor, they provided shelter, altered water flow, and carved out pockets where life could concentrate. In a world dominated by predators and open spaces, even the smallest refuge could make the difference between survival and extinction. After this beginning, reefs grew in scale and ambition. By the Middle Devonian, they had reached a breathtaking size, stretching for hundreds of kilometers and dominating shallow seas. Their builders included stromatoporoids, enigmatic relatives of sponges, which layered calcium carbonate into solid masses. These Devonian reefs rivaled the scale of modern giants like the Great Barrier Reef, creating habitats that were home to armored fish, trilobites, and the ancestors of the first land vertebrates. Yet this golden age of reefs proved fragile. When the climate shifted and the chemistry of the seas changed, these vast reef systems collapsed, leaving oceans bare of such structures for tens of millions of years. The story did not end there. In the Mesozoic era, after the devastation of the Great Dying and other extinctions, reefs reappeared, this time with new architects. Corals, known as scleractinians, became the dominant builders. Their limestone skeletons locked together into intricate walls, arches, and towers that rose from the seabed. Around them, ammonites drifted, marine reptiles swam, and strange mollusks crept through the crevices. These Mesozoic reefs began to resemble the living reefs we see today, although the creatures that inhabited them belonged to worlds long vanished. Through every age, one truth emerges. Reefs were never permanent. They flourished in times of stability, then crumbled when seas warmed too quickly, when oxygen dropped, or when acidification spread. Each collapse marked the end of an ecosystem, but each resurgence opened the door to entirely new communities. What is striking is not that reefs disappeared, but that they returned, again and again, built by different organisms but always performing the same essential role, gathering life together into dense, intricate webs of interaction. Seen from a distance of hundreds of millions of years, reefs appear less as fixed structures and more as recurring themes in the story of the oceans. Like a melody that returns in different keys, reefs were reinvented by sponges, stromatoporoids, and corals, each version unique yet echoing the same purpose. They were living fortresses, engines of diversity, and anchors of ecosystems. Their builders changed, their inhabitants evolved, but the pattern endured. This rhythm of rise and collapse speaks to both the fragility and the persistence of life. Reefs could vanish for entire epochs, erased by extinction events, only to return in new guises when the seas settled. They demonstrate that while individual designs may fail, the broader idea of reef building is too powerful to remain absent for long. Time and again, the ocean reinvented reefs, proving that the need for such concentrated hubs of life is deeply rooted in the history of the planet. From sponge-built walls of the Cambrian, to stromatoporoid ridges of the Devonian, to coral gardens of the Mesozoic, reefs shaped the flow of currents, the survival of species, and the path of evolution itself. Their story is not one of steady progress, but of cycles, each rise followed by collapse, each collapse followed by rebirth. And through those cycles, reefs became one of the most enduring theaters for life, reminders of how creativity and fragility are forever bound together in the history of the sea. When we think of mass extinctions, it is easy to imagine only endings. Yet, in the deep history of the oceans, These events were never just moments of loss, they were turning points, pauses in one story that gave rise to entirely new ones. The seas emptied of familiar creatures, only to be filled again with forms that seemed startling, inventive, and often unlike anything that had swum before. The first great test came during the Ordovician period, around 444 million years ago. The world then was brimming with shallow seas, alive with trilobites, brachiopods, and coral-like reefs that stretched across continental shelves. Suddenly the planet cooled, vast ice sheets grew, sea levels dropped, and the shallow habitats that had been nurseries of life were drained away. Many creatures, unable to adapt to the abrupt change, vanished. Roughly half of all marine species were swept from existence. Yet even as reefs crumbled and communities dissolved, fragments of life endured. In the aftermath, when the ice retreated and seas returned, survivors spread outward into the empty spaces, taking on new forms and building fresh ecosystems. The Devonian brought another crisis, but this time it was not swift. It unfolded as a long series of setbacks stretching over millions of years. Reefs rose to grand scales only to collapse, time and again, as the chemistry of the oceans shifted. Volcanic eruptions may have darkened skies and spilled carbon dioxide into the air, pushing oxygen in the waters to dangerously low levels. Giants of the time, such as the armored fish Dunkleosteus, disappeared, and entire groups of reef dwellers followed them. Yet through this slow unraveling, certain lineages proved resilient. Early sharks, with their adaptable bodies and efficient hunting strategies, survived where others could not. Lobe-finned fish, too, lingered, carrying within them the beginnings of a journey that would one day cross onto land. The Devonian seas remind us that extinction is not always a sudden blow, but sometimes a prolonged erosion of possibilities, after which new ones take root. Much later came the cataclysm at the close of the Cretaceous, about 66 million years ago. By then, the oceans had become grand theaters of abundance. Coral reefs stretched wide, ammonites spiraled through the waters, and enormous reptiles like mosasaurs ruled as apex predators. Then a single impact changed everything. A vast asteroid struck Earth, filling the skies with dust and fire. Darkness fell over the oceans, plankton populations collapsed, and with them the intricate food webs that depended on them. Ammonites, which had survived for more than 300 million years, disappeared forever. The marine reptiles followed. Their dominance ended in a geological instant. Yet the seas did not stay empty. Sharks, smaller fish, and the early ancestors of whales and dolphins began to flourish, taking advantage of the open niches left behind. Though these extinctions differed in cause and scale, the rhythm they created was the same. Each event cleared the oceans of established life, erasing familiar forms, and each was followed by a surge of renewal as survivors adapted and new creatures appeared. After the Ordovician Ice Age, corals and brachiopods rebuilt reefs. After the Devonian crises, sharks and amphibian ancestors gained ground. After the Cretaceous impact, modern fish and mammals rose to prominence. The ocean, though scarred, always began again. It is tempting to view extinction only as tragedy, but in the sweep of deep time, it was also a process of resetting. Like a tide pulling back and then returning, each collapse was followed by waves of invention. Reefs reappeared in new forms, predators changed their shapes, and food webs reassembled in patterns never seen before. The oceans were not just destroyers of life, but also its greatest cradles, erasing worlds and then filling them with new wonders. Through these cycles of death and renewal, the seas prepared the way for what would come next. And in their rhythm lies the reason why the oceans of today look as they do, rich with sharks, fish, reefs, and mammals that rose from the shadows of past disasters. When we think of oceans, we often picture endless blue waters stretching beneath sunlight, filled with fish, corals, and drifting plankton. Yet the chemistry of those waters has never been fixed. Across hundreds of millions of years, the seas have been a restless mixture, sometimes rich in oxygen and life, other times suffocating and hostile. These shifts were not random. They left traces in stone, records of ancient chemistry written in the language of isotopes and minerals, waiting for scientists to read them. Long before humans ever walked the earth, the chemistry of the oceans was already shaping the path of evolution. Oxygen levels in the water were one of the most important controls. When oxygen was abundant, seas thrived with swarming creatures, reefs flourished, and ecosystems expanded into complexity. But when oxygen fell, life often staggered, leaving behind gaps that could last for millions of years. In some periods, large areas of ocean turned anoxic, meaning that oxygen was nearly absent. In such places, few animals could survive. Instead, bacteria that thrived in oxygen-free environments filled the void, producing toxic gases such as hydrogen sulfide that seeped into the waters. Evidence of these shifts can be found in rocks scattered across the continents today. When sediments were deposited on ancient seafloors, they captured tiny details of the ocean chemistry. Iron, sulfur, and carbon all leave behind isotopic signatures, subtle variations in atomic weight that change depending on the presence or absence of oxygen. By studying these signatures, scientists can reconstruct the moods of the ancient seas. Layers of black shale, for example, often signal times when oceans became oxygen-starved and rich in organic material. Other layers, pale and chalky, reveal times when plankton blooms flourished in oxygen-rich waters, leaving behind vast blankets of limestone. One of the most dramatic periods of chemical change occurred during the Proterozoic eon, long before animals with skeletons appeared. For billions of years, Earth's oceans held very little oxygen. They were rich instead in iron, which stained the waters green and brown. Then, around 2.5 billion years ago, photosynthetic microbes began to release oxygen as a byproduct. This oxygen reacted with dissolved iron in the seas, forming massive deposits of rust-colored rock known as banded iron formations. These ancient rocks, visible in cliffs and outcrops today, are reminders of the time when oxygen first began to trickle into the oceans. Yet oxygen did not rise smoothly. There were peaks and valleys, booms and busts. At certain times, oxygen levels climbed high enough to support more complex forms of life. At others, oxygen dropped again, sending ecosystems into decline. These fluctuations may have played a role in some of the great extinctions that scarred the oceans. During the Permian period, for instance, vast stretches of ocean are thought to have become hypoxic, meaning dangerously low in oxygen. This chemical stress may have helped trigger the Great Dying, when nearly all marine species vanished. Even in later times, ocean chemistry continued to shape the fate of life. In the Devonian seas, falling oxygen levels weakened reef systems and played a part in repeated collapses of marine ecosystems. In the Cretaceous period, volcanic eruptions and shifting climates altered the balance of carbon and oxygen in the seas, stressing plankton at the base of the food web. Every rise and fall of oxygen, every chemical swing, rippled upward through the food chain, influencing who thrived and who disappeared. It is easy to think of chemistry as something invisible and abstract, but in the oceans, it was the quiet architect of life. It decided when reefs could grow and when they would crumble. It determined whether trilobites could flourish or suffocate. It guided the rise of predators and the collapse of entire worlds. And while the animals themselves are long gone, the rocks they left behind hold whispers of that hidden chemistry. By studying isotopes of carbon, oxygen, and sulfur, scientists are able to follow the long rhythm of Earth's oceans, from suffocating depths to vibrant seas bursting with life. As the chemistry of the oceans changed, so too did the forms of life that called them home. It was not always catastrophic. Sometimes the shifts opened doors to entirely new possibilities. A rise in oxygen during the Cambrian period, for example, may have given the energy boost needed for animals to develop hard shells, eyes, and complex behaviors. That single shift in chemistry may have sparked one of the most important explosions of life in Earth's history. The oceans were never passive backdrops. They were restless engines, chemical theaters, where evolution played out under conditions that were always in flux. To look at the seas today is to see only a moment in their story. Beneath their waves lies a memory of countless transformations, written not in words, but in the subtle chemistry of stone and water. And with each shift, life was tested, broken, and rebuilt into something new. The oceans hold many secrets, but perhaps the most haunting are those that remain unsolved. Fossils can give us bones, shells, and impressions in stone, yet they do not always tell us the whole story. What lived in the seas, how it moved, what it ate, and why it vanished are questions that often linger without clear answers. Even with centuries of study and the most advanced tools, scientists are still confronted by mysteries that defy explanation, reminders that much of Earth's history is still hidden in the deep. One of the most puzzling questions lies in the strange fossil of Tullimonstrum, better known as the Tully monster. Found in the fossil beds of Mazon Creek in Illinois, this creature had stalked eyes set far apart, a long, flexible proboscis ending in a circular mouth lined with teeth, and a body that does not clearly match any group of animals we know. For decades, scientists have debated whether it was a vertebrate with a backbone or an invertebrate like a worm or mollusk. Studies of its fossilized tissues suggested at times that it might be related to lampreys, jawless vertebrates that still survive today. Other studies argued the opposite, pointing out that no clear backbone structure has ever been found. Every new analysis seems to spark as much doubt as certainty. The Tully monster stands as a reminder that not all life leaves neat categories behind. Some creatures existed in forms so unusual that they resist even the basic labels of vertebrate or invertebrate, and their true identity may remain lost in the shadows of time. Another enigma lies with ammonites, the coiled shelled relatives of squids and octopuses that thrived for hundreds of millions of years. Their shells twisted into spirals and coils, their inner chambers filled with gas and liquid that allowed them to float and dive with ease. They were among the most successful creatures of their age, surviving multiple extinctions, adapting to new climates, and filling the oceans in extraordinary numbers. Yet at the end of the Cretaceous period, ammonites vanished completely. What makes this disappearance strange is that their close cousins, the nautiluses, survived. Both groups had similar lifestyles and relied on chambered shells for buoyancy. Both lived in the same oceans when the asteroid struck 66 million years ago. Why one group endured while the other did not remains one of the enduring questions of paleontology. Some suggest that ammonites, with their fast-growing young and dependence on plankton, were more vulnerable to the collapse of food chains after the impact. Nautiluses, with their slower growth and hardier survival strategies, may have been able to outlast the crisis. yet the precise reasons remain unclear, leaving behind only the spiraled shells of a vanished dynasty. The origins of bioluminescence also drift in mystery. Today, glowing life fills the oceans, from deep-sea fish that dangle lights from their heads to tiny plankton that flash in waves along tropical shores. But when did this ability first appear? Fossils cannot easily preserve light, so evidence must be pieced together from indirect signs. Some scientists believe that the earliest glowing organisms were bacteria living billions of years ago in oxygen-poor seas, producing light as a byproduct of their chemistry. Others suggest that bioluminescence evolved later as a defense against predators or as a tool for hunting in the dark. Comparisons with modern creatures show that glowing life has evolved many times independently in fish, squid, jellyfish, and microbes. This repeated emergence suggests that light is one of the ocean's most powerful survival tools. Still, the true moment when the seas first began to shimmer with living light is unknown, hidden in ages too distant to trace with certainty. And then there are fossils that defy all categories. In places like the Burgess Shale in Canada or the Chengjiang beds in China, delicate impressions reveal animals with features so strange that they cannot be placed with confidence in any known branch of the tree of life. Some have spines and frills that resemble no modern creature. Others have eyes in unusual positions, bodies twisted into unfamiliar shapes, or combinations of traits that seem borrowed from different groups altogether. Each discovery challenges the neat lines we try to draw between families and phyla, reminding us that evolution was once far more experimental and chaotic than we imagine. These unsolved mysteries do more than puzzle scientists. They create a sense of wonder, a recognition that the oceans have always been deeper than our knowledge and stranger than our expectations. The seas of the past were not just filled with life, but with lives that still whisper questions across hundreds of millions of years. Some of those questions may one day find answers in new fossils or advanced technologies. Others may never be resolved, remaining as eternal mysteries in the story of the sea. But each of them deepens the sense that the oceans, past and present, are realms where certainty is rare and curiosity is endless. Across the long history of Earth, the oceans have been both playground and crucible. They have sheltered the first stirrings of complex life, nurtured whole worlds of creatures, and at times swept nearly all of them away. When we look back through that record, the pattern that emerges is not one of steady progress, but of endless trial and reinvention. Each chapter tells us something vital about the way life adapts, and also how easily it can falter when the seas themselves shift. One of the clearest lessons is that evolution depends on experimentation. The Cambrian seas burst with creatures so unusual that many look more alien than earthly. Some had 5 eyes, some bristled with armor, others grew spines, trunks, or appendages that defy neat categories. Most of those designs vanished, but they mattered. By pushing into so many possibilities, life laid the groundwork for the future. The winners were not always the largest or the fiercest. They were often the flexible ones, able to survive in changing waters, feed on different prey, or move into new habitats. This flexibility remains a timeless truth. In every age since, survival has favored not strength alone, but the ability to adapt. Alongside this creativity lies a sobering truth. Ecosystems are fragile. Time and again, reef systems rose as strongholds of diversity, only to collapse when the climate tipped out of balance. During the Devonian, reefs built by curious coral-like organisms, called stromatoporoids, grew vast, then vanished as environmental stresses mounted. At the end of the Cretaceous, Ammonites that had thrived for more than 300 million years were gone in a geological instant, swept away with the great reptiles of the sea when the asteroid struck. Even lineages that seemed indestructible were revealed to be vulnerable once the oceans changed too fast for them to keep pace. From these stories, we learn that stability is an illusion. Life on Earth has always been bound tightly to the conditions of its environment, and even the most successful groups have their limits. When temperatures climb too high, when currents shift too quickly, or when chemistry drifts beyond tolerance, ecosystems unravel. The fossil record is filled with these warnings, showing us how sudden change can erase entire ways of life. For us today, that record is more than ancient history. It is a mirror. The modern seas are warming, currents are changing, and acidification is spreading. We see corals bleaching and dying, fish shifting their ranges, and oxygen levels dipping in places where they once ran steady. These changes echo patterns that have played out before, and the outcomes of those earlier episodes tell us what is at stake. The reefs and fisheries we know could fade as quickly as the stromatoporoids. Entire groups could vanish, leaving gaps in ecosystems that may take millions of years to refill. Yet the story of prehistoric oceans also carries hope. Life has shown again and again that it can recover, often in ways more imaginative than we expect. After every collapse, survivors rose and filled the empty spaces, creating communities no one could have predicted. Sharks endured through multiple extinctions, reinventing themselves as smaller or larger forms, always adjusting. Mammals found their way back into the sea after the reptiles were gone, reshaping the oceans with new intelligence and power. These examples remind us that while ecosystems are fragile, they also hold a deep capacity for renewal, if given the chance. There is also a humbling lesson here. The strange creatures of the past, the armored fishes, the spiral-jawed sharks, the ammonites with their coiled shells, were once ordinary members of thriving worlds. Their disappearance does not mean they were failures. It only means the oceans changed and their time ended. The same may one day be said of us, unless we recognize how much our lives depend on the balance of the seas. When we read the ocean's past as a story rather than a set of facts, a theme becomes clear. Life flourishes when conditions are stable enough for diversity to bloom. It falters when those conditions tip too far, too fast. That is the message pressed into stone across 500 million years of history. It is not simply a record of creatures long gone, but a guidebook for the future of our own oceans, and for the choices that will decide what kinds of life inherit them. For a long while now, we have wandered together through forgotten waters, sinking into oceans that stretched back across hundreds of millions of years. Each layer we passed through held its own wonders, from creatures with eyes perched on stalks to predators with armor-plated jaws, from forests of swaying crinoids to spiral-shelled drifters that once ruled the seas. These ancient waters were not quiet backdrops, but living, shifting worlds where chemistry, climate, and chance shaped the strange experiments of evolution. Now, as our long descent comes to an end, it is time to turn upward, back toward the light. Imagine rising slowly from the deepest trenches, past shadowy plains where bioluminescent sparks drift like stars, past reefs that once shimmered with corals and sponges in forgotten ages, past the giant hunters that swam with power and grace before fading into extinction. With every upward movement, the pressure eases, the darkness thins, and the memory of what the oceans once were follows us gently toward the surface. The prehistoric seas remind us of something profound. Earth has never been static. Its waters have shifted from green and iron-rich to blue and oxygen-filled. They have brimmed with ammonites, trilobites, sea scorpions, and plesiosaurs, only to watch them vanish in waves of extinction. Each silence was followed by renewal, each collapse by the rise of something new. The oceans have always been both destroyer and cradle, erasing worlds and creating them again in different forms. It is humbling to recognize how strange those ancient waters truly were. The creatures that swam there were so alien that even today many cannot be placed neatly on the tree of life. Some still resist classification, as if their very existence was a reminder that nature's imagination surpasses our own. They reveal that Earth's history was not a march toward the familiar, but a vast unfolding of possibilities, many of which left no descendants at all. The seas remind us that life is not predictable. It is inventive, restless, and endlessly willing to try new shapes. As we rise closer to the surface, the lessons of those oceans become clearer. They tell us that ecosystems are fragile, that climate can change swiftly, and that the chemistry of the seas can alter the course of life itself. They show that survival often depends not on strength, but on adaptability. And they remind us that the oceans of today, full of whales, coral reefs, and drifting plankton, are only the latest chapter in a much longer story. The emotional truth is simple. The oceans remind us that Earth was once stranger than imagination, and perhaps stranger than it will ever be again. Within their depths, creatures lived that blurred the line between animal and dream, leaving us fossils that puzzle and inspire in equal measure. Their story does not just belong to the past, it still shapes the currents, the reefs, and the living seas we know now. And so, with the surface breaking above, we return gently from the shadows of prehistory to the present day. The journey has been long, but the questions it raises are endless. What mysteries still lie hidden in stone? What creatures remain undiscovered in the dark waters of our own oceans? And what will the seas look like millions of years from now, when today's life is itself only a memory? If you have found peace and wonder in this slow drift through the deep, I would be grateful if you gave this video a gentle like, or perhaps tapped subscribe. It helps other curious minds find their way here, to this quiet corner where science and sleep meet. And if you would like, share in the comments where you are listening from tonight and what time it is there. It is always a joy to see how far across the world this little voyage travels. Now let the surface rise to meet you. Let the waters fall away. The ancient seas will always be here, waiting in stone and memory, reminders of a time when Earth itself felt like another planet.